Chapter 1. A New World. It is not often that one stares down a corpse. For a corpse, I had to say, it was a surprisingly well-dressed one. The dead don't usually look so pretty. Gold and bright red and the finest and most luxurious silks I had ever seen, all packed into perhaps the most impractical and ostentatious set of gilded armor one could imagine. He had a brilliantly shiny sword with the most wonderful patterns in the steel clasped in his hands, and two painted stones covering his eyes. Had I wandered into some sort of Renaissance fair, or maybe a cosplay convention? Oh, maybe even a movie set. That would be a story to tell the grandkids, Looking around, nobody could be seen. What good is a convention, especially one held in what looked to be such a grand locale, if nobody bothered to turn up? The only person in the vicinity was a freakishly tall and yet stunning blonde, who somehow managed to put all the models I had ever seen to shame. Cheekbones you could cut glass on, brilliant emerald eyes, pearly white teeth, and long flowing locks. If she was an actress, she was certainly not one I knew. If she was a cosplayer, then it begged the question of who she was cosplaying. No normal person dressed like that, at least not in the modern age. It was a conservative style but gave hints of a well-maintained and eminently desirable figure underneath it all. This observation, however, was swiftly followed by another, less pleasant, realization. She wasn't tall, I was short. Now, I had never been the tallest, but I was a solid 6 feet on most days, and this woman's proportions did not lead me to believe that she was 7 feet tall. I looked down at myself, observing the similarly fine clothing that I seemed to be wearing, and then around at my location, and I struggled to restrain my urge to curse when the truth of the matter struck me. I was a child. I hadn't been a child in a long time, and the fact that I suddenly was one did not serve to alleviate my confusion at the situation. I didn't curse, still trying to gain my bearings, but the woman stood next to me did shoot me a look when my breath quickened as my panic grew. Suddenly, I was broken from my reverie when a deep voice could be heard echoing off the walls of the building. "Your brother is dead," the man said as he walked into the room. "Do you know what that means?" I kept silent, my breath falling still as the reality of my situation finally dawned on me. I was Tommen Baratheon, the woman stood next to me was Cersei, my mother, and the man speaking to me was Tywin motherfucking Lannister. Either this was the most vivid dream I had ever had, or something was deeply wrong. I didn't do drugs, I didn't drink, so what else could it be? I wasn't a child either, so there weren't any notions of having gone anywhere by accident. I hoped and prayed it was a dream, and one that I was due to wake from any moment now, but knowing my luck, I wasn't going to bet on it. The world of Westeros was a notoriously brutal one, so I wasn't going to fuck around on the off chance that this wasn't a dream. Whilst I was working this out, the older man, who I happened to notice that whilst he didn't look like Charles Dance, he certainly sounded like him, grew concerned at my lack of response to his question. "I'm not trying to trick you." I kept it short and simple, and resisted a grimace when my voice came out high-pitched and childish. "It means I'll be the next king." He nodded, moving closer to us. "Yes, you will be king. What kind of king do you think you'll be?" I contemplated my answer, looking down at Joffrey's corpse, and then back up at Tywin, "A good one, and hopefully an old one as well." I think so as well. You've got the right temperament for it. But what makes a good king, What is a good king's single most important quality? The woman stood next to me, supposedly Cersei, interjected, "This is hardly the place or the time." Like Tywin, I opted to ignore her. "That's easy. Wisdom." Tywin looked curious. "Yes. But what is wisdom, A king's power is vast, and all-encompassing. His duty is to exercise good judgment, so that the realm may prosper under his guidance. Making good decisions requires a king to be smart, but it also requires him to be humble, to know what he knows and to know what he doesn't. And to be wise enough to know the people who know what he doesn't know, and to seek them out." Tywin looked a mixture of pleased and contemplative, though his expression had barely shifted from its default position at all. "You're young, but I can tell you'll be a wise king. A wise young king listens to his counselors and heeds their advice till he comes of age. And the wisest of kings continue to listen to them long afterwards." He looked down at the corpse and back at me. "Your brother was not a wise king. He was not a good king. If he had been, perhaps he would still be alive." I resisted the urge to snort at the shade he was throwing. "What do you think his moniker will be, now that he's dead?" "Every king has one. Jaehaerys was known as the Conciliator, Darren simply as the Good." Tywin looked at me. "What do you think yours will be?" "King Tommen," I said, "the surprisingly competent." Tywin quirked the eyebrow at the strangeness of the title. came around the dais where Joffrey's body lay, and placed his arm on my shoulder as he began to lead me out of what I presumed was the sept. Now, as the king, you will have to marry. Do you understand why? A king needs a queen, both to further the family line and to forge an alliance with the new queen's family. Tywin nodded. Do you know how that happens? Yes. Of course, but has anyone explained the details to you? Hearing Tywin offer to give me the talk was simply too good of an offer to pass up. I've only ever heard tales. The nature of them leads me to believe they aren't true. Tywin nodded. It's all relatively straightforward. Before he could continue, Jaime approached from in front, and looked me in the eyes. How are you? A little nervous, truth be told. Being king is a massive amount of responsibility for a child who's never had to deal with any before. I looked at Joffrey's body. I don't want to be like him, and I don't want to wind up like him. I turned my gaze back on Jaime. Otherwise, I'm fine. Jaime grasped my shoulder to comfort me. You are fine, and you will be fine. I'll see to that. I nodded, and Jaime ventured down the steps to see his son's body, and presumably to fuck his sister as well, the pervert. I ascended the steps with the man who was for the foreseeable future, or at least till I woke up from this nightmare, my grandfather. We emerged from the gloomy sept out into the brightness of day, and before Tywin could lead me to wherever he wanted to lead me, I looked out onto the city and spoke. Do you smell that, Lord Tywin? Smell what? It was the smell of shit, but I couldn't help myself. Opportunity, grandfather, what else? 4 comments 0 vote. Chapter 2. Pragmatism. The day went by faster than I had imagined it would. My coronation was a surprisingly humdrum affair. The people assembled in the throne room, the High Septon blessed my rule and so on. The event dragged on in pomp and circumstance, and I took the time to acclimatize myself to those around me. Looking around, some bore a resemblance to those I had seen on-screen, though not one was a perfect match. Marjorie was closest, but with many differences in her likeness that led me to believe that this was not the show universe. Conversely, not everyone matched the description given in the books either, leading me to the conclusion that this world was something of a mashup of the two. That had interesting implications for my future plans, depending on what was what, but I filed it away for the moment. The coronation ceremony drew to a close with thunderous applause, echoing off the walls of the throne room, and I seated myself atop the monstrosity that was the Iron Throne, with jagged edges all over, and bladed steps leading up to the actual throne part. I could only seat myself in a few positions lest I cut myself, which I am pleased to report I did not. The evening passed, and I was soon shown to my bedchambers to spend the night, where I had the pleasure of stumbling upon a furry and affectionate Tom, presumably Sir Pounce. I lay down, and attempted to fall to sleep, knowing I would have a long day ahead. Before I could, the sound of soft footfalls could be heard, and Marjorie emerged from the shadows, walking to my bed, and I felt the need to question her. How did you get past the Kingsguard? Even as the words left my mouth, I knew the answer. Either she bribed one of the more ineffective members, or Loras was guarding me tonight. Either way, caution was advised. She brushed my question aside, almost mockingly. The Kingsguard. I narrowed my eyes at her. Your brother, then, Sir Loras. She had an odd look on her face, and I continued, in any case, I don't think you're supposed to be here. I'm not allowed visitors at night. My mother would not be pleased. She lit the candle on the bedside table, seemingly unaware that the cut of her dress showed off her cleavage as she did so. I'm not a visitor, Your Grace. Word has it, I'm to be your bride. She looked at me once she was done with the candle, taking a seat at the side of my bed. Did you know that people in arranged marriages often never meet until their wedding day? Before we decide to spend our lives together, we ought to get to know one another, don't you think? I'm aware. But a late-night visit hardly looks good, and if my mother or grandfather found you. She cut me off. It can be our secret, If we're going to be man and wife, we'll have a few secrets from them, I hope. She smiled at me. So, Your Grace, tell me a secret. You first. Marjorie wound up to answer, and was saved from doing so as Sir Pounce leapt up into my bed. Hello, aren't you a proper fellow? I couldn't help the childish grin on my face. That's Sir Pounce, the bravest knight in all the 7 kingdoms. Some even say he is the one in the prophecy, Azor Ahai born again, come to save mankind from the long night. Marjorie humored me. Most gallant, I can see, and very handsome. I looked her in the eyes. Joffrey didn't best like him. He threatened to skin him alive and mix his innards in with my food. Marjorie seemed genuinely sympathetic. That's very cruel. She looked at me as if she were appraising me. You don't strike me as cruel. Well, I hope I'm not. She nodded sagely. That's a relief, because you know what happens when we marry. My grandfather walked me through it. We say our vows before the High Septon, and afterwards we. She chuckled, cutting me off in the process. When we marry, I become yours, forever. I offered her a hard stare. Whose does that make you, then? Renly's, Joffrey's or mine? Because if that's what happens when we marry, then I don't believe it, and I don't think you do either. And what do you think happens when we wed? I offered her a smile. You become my wife, and if I live long enough, the mother of my children. The realm gains stability, and both of our houses a useful alliance. We may even fall in love, but I have also been told that is more often than not a fantasy. She seemed genuinely saddened. You mustn't say that, Your Grace. I feigned a sigh. I can only hope. She lingered for a moment, seemingly uncomfortable, but then made to leave, speaking to me in a whisper. It's getting late, I should go. May I come and visit you again? I nodded. In the day, no more night visits till we are wed. I'll not start my reign by risking the spread of rumors of impropriety. She gave a breath of laughter, her tone suddenly becoming coy. All right then, but I hope you'll grant me one small impropriety. She leaned in, and offered me a tender kiss on the lips. It lingered for a while, and when it was done, her head hovered just above mine, her tone now serious. Remember, our little secret. I nodded, and she left. Sleep struggled to come after that, though eventually I exhausted myself by my tossing and turning, and the morning sun streaming into my chambers woke me back up. The servants came in, running my bath and insisting on dressing me, which I allowed them to do, if only to avoid seeming strange. Afterwards, I called for my uncle Jaime. He came up, clad in his Kingsguard armor, and kneeled before me. Your Grace. I may be king now, but you are still my uncle. When in private, you don't have to kneel. He rose from his knee. Yes, Your Grace. I want you by my side today, understood? He nodded, although reluctantly. Of course, Your Grace. I adopted the closest thing to a commanding tone that my cracking voice could offer. Before we leave, I want to make one thing clear. The things you hear in my presence are to be treated as most secret. You will not so much as breathe a word to grandfather, to mother, to anyone. Am I understood? Jaime looked mighty confused, but nodded regardless. Of course, Your Grace. With that settled, we departed from my chambers, making for one of the terraces in the keep, where I sent for Bronn. You are Bronn. That's me. He looked me up and down. So, what do you want with me? I understand you are in the employ of my uncle, Tyrion Lannister. His eyes darted to Jaime, whose teeth were clenched at the mention of his brother, and then to the crown on my head. Was. Not anymore. So, you're seeking employment. He shrugged. I suppose I am. I nodded. Good. I find myself in need of men like you, and would much like to procure your services. I'll offer the same rate my uncle offered before his incarceration. Bronn was now in business mode. He offered to double anything anyone offered me. I smiled. I thought you weren't working for him anymore. In any case, I'm afraid that my uncle's gold is the hay that lines the floor of his cell, and his sliver the dust. Bronn seemed a tad less enthusiastic, though he exceeded my point. Killing a king will do that to a man, I suppose. Still, he promised me a high-born beauty, and a castle of me own. Seems only fair I give him the chance to keep that promise. I nodded. Stokeworth, and the soft-hearted lady that comes with. Serve me well, and when the time comes, it'll be yours. And I offer you that with the added bonus of not dangling you from the end of a rope for serving a traitor. Bronn seemed unamused, but he shrugged it off. Fair enough. I gestured to the edge of the terrace, where seclusion was more easily attained. Shall we discuss your duties further? He nodded, and we walked over, till we were far from anyone else. This area would normally be a hive of activity, but so early in the day, scarcely anyone was about. Only when we finally reached the edge, far away from any prying ears as one could get inside the Red Keep, did I speak. I find myself in need of men of dubious morality. He nodded in understanding. You need someone's throat cut, Jaime looked alarmed by the direction of the conversation, but wisely opted for silence after I shot him a look, amongst other things. I need a team of competent and reliable killers, someone to do the dirty work that is an unfortunate necessity of governing. Not sadistic, you understand, like the mountain, just callous enough to do what must be done. He nodded. Tell your men they will be richly rewarded for their service, and make sure they are cut from the same cloth as you. People who will do dirty work for coin, and who can be trusted to be discreet about it. I don't want a mess on my hands because one of your men fancied a girl in a tavern and decided to rape her. or worse, to spill his guts to her, you understand. Bronn nodded again. I know the type. I looked at Jaime, and then turned back to Bronn. You will have one more duty. Alongside slitting the right throats, I will need you to aid my other uncle in regaining his abilities with the sword, such that he is as good with his left as he once was with his right. Naturally, I will be partaking in these lessons as well. Officially I'll be asking Esser Balin of the Kingsguard, so you needn't worry about any extra scrutiny, but I also know that shadowed blades kill just as well, if not better, than shiny steel. Bronn looked at Jaime's golden hand whilst Jaime bristled under his gaze, and whistled, very pretty. I almost didn't notice it underneath all that armor. I nodded and smiled as I made to leave. Good. You'll have your coin on the morrow, Esser Bronn. After we left, Jaime felt it fit to speak. Your Grace, is this wise? I mean, a sellsword is hardly trustworthy or honorable, and you have many knights in your service. Good and competent and honorable knights, uncle. Who better to do the dishonorable thing than a dishonorable man? Jaime looked at me strangely. You've changed. I smirked. Not the sweet boy you remember. You talk more like your grandfather than yourself. It's strange. I'll take that as a compliment. I straightened my expression, and spoke to him with as much earnestness as I could muster. I learnt many hard lessons during the war. I may not have seen much fighting myself, but I did see plenty of the consequences, and unlike Joffrey, I learned from it. Power is all well and good, but from what I have seen it is often subtlety that gets the job done best. Bronn has plenty of that, and as a sellsword, he is both a disposable and a deniable asset. He had a strange glint in his eyes. I know, it's just. I nodded. I know. I didn't expect to have to do any of this either. I didn't want the crown, but it's mine now, and I am not fool enough to neglect any aspect of governance simply because I find it distasteful. I may not yet be a man grown, but I am far from the child you knew, the one who believed in all those songs. I turned and looked at him. I wanted to be a good king, but I also want to be an old king, and I have enough sense to know that sometimes that means getting my hands dirty. So, uncle, will you help me? To be both a good king and an old one. He bowed his head, a determined look on his face. Of course, your grace. Chapter 3. Poison Eye. When you think of Olenna Tyrell, what is the one word that comes to mind? In a past life, my answer might have been cunning, rude, devious, dangerous. She was intelligent, to be sure, and subtle, and capable of the most elegant wordplay, and yet, none of those things came to the front of my mind when I looked at her. Now, that word was old. The passing resemblance to Diana Rigg aside, as well as the almost pitch-perfect recreation of the voice I remembered, this woman was different, to say the least. It would not have been an exaggeration to say that she was the oldest person in the capital. Pycelle offered stiff competition, but I doubted that even he could match the tally of years that she had, and it showed. Her skin seemed to be hanging off her bones, and her entire visage was marked by wrinkles. Her manner of dress did much to alleviate the dreaded sag, but there was only so much to be done. Her back was hunched, her hair gone a snowy white, her frame smaller than even mine, and I was a child. I thanked whoever was watching that at least she wasn't toothless, and had a still strong set of teeth which she seemed determined to use to constantly snack on something. Cheese, figs, cakes, and all in the scant few minutes I had been sat here. She munched on her cakes and delighted in bossing her people around, issuing orders like a general, delighting in the mounting frustration of her servants and maids. In spite of the silliness of her antics, especially considering her age, I did not let myself relax. This was a woman on par with Tywin Lannister in the power department, and just as ruthless, and perhaps even more subtle than he. In a straight battle of wits, I did not doubt my defeat. Here, she was in her element, overlooking the city, high above it all, on a vast terrace which doubled as a garden. In many ways, her seeming infirmity only enhanced the sense of danger that one got from sitting in her presence. One did not live that long without serious brains, or at least without picking up some tricks along the way. At the peak of her power, the only advantage I had to bring to bear was the element of surprise. My entire plan was predicated on it, and I intended to take full advantage. Your Grace, her tone was almost mocking, not that I don't enjoy your company, but can I ask why you decided to join an old woman for tea today? For the pleasure of your company, of course. She raised her eyebrows at that, and once again saw fit to mock me. I am honored. To think that His Grace could find time out of his busy schedule of chasing cats to sit with little old me. She brought her tone back down to earth, though, once you marry my granddaughter, I suppose you and I will have a lot more time together, won't we? I feigned a frown. Marry your granddaughter. A little presumptive, don't you think? Olena's gaze grew sharper. Tell me, Your Grace, are you at all familiar with the events of the past year? Only as much as any king tends to be. Very well, allow me to illuminate you. She gestured to the table, laden with cakes. This is the product of my house. House Tyrell has supplied 1,000,000 bushels of wheat, 500,000 bushels each of barley, oats and rye, 20,000 head of cattle, 50,000 sheep, and is set to supply more to feed this cesspit of a city. She gestured to the guards standing at attention at the entrance to the terrace. As is that. House Tyrell have supplied 12,000 infantrymen, 1,800 mounted lances, 2,000 in support, all for your war. Olenna snorted. Why, even a member of your own Kingsguard is a Tyrell. All that comes with the assurance that my granddaughter would be queen. She leaned back in her chair, adopting an almost casual air about herself, acting with the kind of nonchalance one would expect if you were discussing the weather. Of course, if you don't desire our little Rose, we can't fault you for that. The heart want what the heart wants, after all, but then you can't fault us for taking our grain and our men away from here. She leaned in, her tone regaining the intensity it had lost not a moment ago, and when the people starve, who do you think they'll blame? I allowed myself to smile, completely unfazed by her threats. This is how you sell your granddaughter. With threats. One would think you would seek to exalt to me about her womanly virtues. I didn't take you for a fool. My granddaughter is one of the loveliest maidens in the realm, a fact obvious to anyone with eyes, even if you were a sword-swallower like Renly was. She looked me up and down, the insinuation clear in her tone. Are you? I snorted, hardly. So, why are we here? You knew my granddaughter is nice, kind, and pretty, and now you know that House Tyrell is necessary to your survival. What more could you ask for? I allowed myself to smile. A couple million dragons should suffice. Olenna snorted on her drink as she laughed. I offer thousands and thousands of tons of food, thousands of men, the hand of the most eligible maiden in all 7 kingdoms, and yet you still have the gall to ask for more. I'm not asking. She raised an eyebrow, thoroughly unimpressed. Oh. It is not House Tyrell that is necessary, Lady Olenna, it is the Reach. You have cast a pretty net around the Reach, to be sure, but unlike my grandfather in the Westerlands, your power still rests atop a house of cards. Houses Hightower and Redwyn will never betray you, on account of blood, but the rest. Say I made Lord Tarley's daughter my bride, and Lord Rowan my hand. They are both sensible men, or so I have heard, and they would doubtless take the opportunity presented. With the Florents already loyal to Stannis over you, that is 3 of your most powerful bannermen poised to oppose you. Say my uncle Jaime marries into another great house, and all of a sudden your house of cards comes tumbling down. Mix the Lannister armies in, and the Dornish, who will surely take advantage of the ensuing chaos, and we have the makings of another war on the scale of the one in the Riverlands, all right on your doorstep. Olenna nodded sagely. And when the fields burn and the granaries are all looted, who will feed the realm? She smiled at me, thinking she had won. It was a handsome threat to make, child, but an ultimately empty one. You want to be a good king, or at least that is what I hear, and letting your people starve is hardly going to aid you in that cause, is it? I ceded her point. You're right, of course. I never did have much of a stomach for bloodshed. I shook my head almost mournfully. The only real time I've ever seen any was when Joffrey died. Frothing at the mouth, face turning purple, it was horrid. I looked Olenna in the eye. Had you ever seen the Strangler work, Lady Olenna, before you had it slipped in his cup? She paled a shade, her face remaining otherwise flat and her expression unchanged. I smiled at the implicit admission. My mother may have stuffing in place of her brains, but I do not. I leaned in, my voice quietening till it was little more than a whisper. Did you think I wouldn't notice that headdress that Lady Sansa was wearing? That Baelish is mysteriously missing, and straight after Joffrey's death. Chapter 4. Poison 2. My mother may have stuffing in place of her brains, but I do not. I leaned in, my voice quietening till it was little more than a whisper. Did you think I wouldn't notice that headdress that Lady Sansa was wearing? That Baelish is mysteriously missing, and straight after Joffrey's death. Olenna switched from shock to anger. Has the crown suddenly stopped needing the troops, golden wheat that my house supplies? Do you expect our alliance to continue after you have threatened our future with these lies? For our armies to continue to fight your war? I continued, unfazed by her threats. I may not have the stomach for bloodshed, Lady Olenna, but my mother certainly does, and she loved Joffrey with all her heart. All I'd need to do is tell her, and she would demand that head's roll is justice for Joffrey, and 3 of your 4 grandchildren are currently in her grasp. Your armies may be vast and mighty, but they can't protect you, nor your grandchildren, from the truth. Assuming your house survives the ensuing conflict, I imagine you will find it significantly harder to make any alliance afterwards, with the taboo of king-slaying staining the Tyrell name. I lightened my tone and dismissed my earlier threats with a careless wave of my arm. Of course, none of that need happen at all. I am not a cruel boy like Joffrey was, and I happen to actually like your granddaughter, but I am also a person who understands the necessity of setting an example to keep people in line. Olenna's expression turned sour. 2,000,000 dragons. I attempted to be reassuring. Come now, the Reach is fat and bloated like your lordly son, you can afford the expense. Not to mention, with the Riverlands in ruins, I expect you should make most of that coin back quickly enough over the course of the coming winter. Once your virtual monopoly on food for the coming winter is considered, it's a tiny price to pay for all that I'm offering you. She eyed me coldly for a moment, and then threw her head back and cackled. Oh yes, you'll do just fine for our Rose, I can tell. I shared her smile, and stood from my chair. I'll be waiting on that coin, Lady Olenna. I expect the first shipment to arrive before Tyrion's trial commences. She waved me away. Yes, yes. I'll let the Lord Oaf of Highgarden know. I walked away from the terrace, allowing myself to relax slightly when it disappeared out of sight behind stone walls. My stomach threatened to rumble, on account of the fact that I neglected to eat or drink anything with Lady Olenna, in spite of having ostensibly sat with her for tea. Even still, I did not stop for food, making my way directly to the chambers that I had selected for my solar. Once inside, I sent for the Grandmaster, who appeared only after a long delay. My apologies, Your Grace, for the delay. As Pycelle sat, I observed him. His whole body seemed to tremble with age, making it seem as if he was about to keel over at any moment. The chains wrapped around his neck seemed to weigh him down immeasurably, and he walked as a hunchback would. When he sat down, he did so with a small whimper, as though he was relieving himself of a great burden. It was a masterful performance, in truth, and if I didn't know any better, I suspected that even I would have fell for it. The snowy white and thinning hair, the mildly disheveled look of his robes, the wrinkles about his facial features, all seemed to sell the image he sought to present. He looked nothing like he did in the show, and save for the occasional similarity, he didn't much sound like him either. It was hard to gauge which Pycelle this man truly was, and there was only really one way to find out. He may not have been the greatest player in either the books or the show, but he was competent enough and certainly worthy of caution. In any case, I suspected I would get what I wanted out our meeting today. I sent Esser Balin, the knight who had been guarding me for today, to wait outside, covertly instructing him to send for Bronn as I did so, and gestured for Pycelle to sit. Do you know why I have called you here today? I gather you want to discuss a few matters with me privately, in advance of tomorrow's council meeting. I nodded, and he continued to speak. I often find that the council environment is less than hospitable to the principles of good governance. You are right, in a sense. In truth, I have called you here to discuss your treason. Pycelle broke out in a fit of feigned stammering. Your Grace, you cannot. I mean, I have. I would never. Perhaps my uncle was right, perhaps in the black cells you truly found your level. Pycelle's words became unintelligible. Stop it. Silence descended on the chamber. Am I the only one who can see through this performance? Is it possible that so many could be so stupid for so long? Pycelle straightened, any pretense of frailty abandoned, the fear draining from his face. There are times I have trouble believing it myself. Then why do you bother? So many flowers, Your Grace. Each wanting to grow the tallest, bloom the brightest, and one by one, sooner or later, they all get plucked. I don't want to be the tallest or the brightest, Your Grace, I only want to remain in the garden, until my time comes to return to the dirt. I thank you for your poetic candor, Grandmaster, but I still don't see why I shouldn't have you return to the dirt today. Pycelle remained calm in spite of my threat. Since the time I convinced the Mad King to open his gates to your grandfather, I have served the interests of the House of Lannister, unfailingly. Which is also treason, I might remind you. Pycelle nodded sagely. In that case, Your Grace, your uncle the Lord Jaime Lannister is also a traitor, and a far greater one than me, given that he killed the Mad King rather than merely deceiving him as I did. Even still, you betrayed my uncle's trust, who I might remind you is a Lannister. Because I felt he was acting against the interests of his house, yes. A wise decision, don't you think, Your Grace, given that he also turned out to be a Kingslayer? And what have the Lannisters done to earn such touching loyalty? They have built the strongest house. And what happens when they are no longer the strongest house? Pycelle smiled. by that time I will be rotting beneath the floor of the Sept of Baelor. Assuming you deem my years of service worthy of that honor, your grace. I nodded. In the future, starting from today, it is not House Lannister you will serve, but me. You will keep my secrets, and you will divulge them to nobody, not even my grandfather. And should you to fail to do that, I will have you returned to the dirt, post-haste. Yes, your grace. I nodded and smiled. I have a request for you, Grandmaster. I am in need of a certain kind of poison, and I have been told that you are something of an expert on the subject. Pycelle frowned as he nodded. Of course, your grace. May I ask why you are in need of poison? If you want to be rid of someone, surely you can just order them executed in your capacity as king. Poison is a woman's weapon, after all. I care not that it is a woman's weapon. And no, Pycelle, you may not ask why. In any case, I need something to weaken a man when ingested, to kill him slowly. Something subtle, almost unnoticeable in everyday life, yet effective. Pycelle took a moment to think. Widow's blood or the tears of Lee come to mind, your grace, alongside some species of mushroom. Do you have any of those in your stores? A little widow's blood, and perhaps a little Greekap. I'm afraid that after Lord Tyrion raided my stores, I find myself to be a tad short on anything else. Fetch what you have. Pycelle made to leave, and Pycelle. He stopped in place and looked at me questioningly. Yes, your grace. I let my tone carry the promise of violence, not a word. To anyone. Pycelle bowed and left for his chambers. In the interim before he returned, Bronn arrived. You called for me. I nodded and gestured for him to sit. I did. I have a task for you. What is it? Tell me, Bronn, have you heard of the mountain that rides? ... Hey guys, I really need you to throw some power stones to elevate the ranking smiley face. Chapter 5. Deception I. Getting some FaceTime with a Baron Martell was a surprisingly hard thing to do. Even though I was a king, I was also a king operating under the pretense of being a child. As such, making a visit to the city was a move that would almost immediately raise some red flags in the minds of people whose attention I wanted to evade, at least till the trial was over. Conversely, I also wanted to impress upon a baron the power of the throne, as a backup in case the offer of Gregor's head on a stick proved insufficient to achieve my goals. Even worse, a baron spent much of his time post-wedding in Chataya's brothel, where he opted to stay in his stint in King's Landing, rightfully suspicious of the Lannisters in the Red Keep. Ultimately, if I was going to extract the maximum benefit from Tyrion's trial, it was a risk I was going to have to take. It wasn't like Baratheons weren't known for whoring, right? Being a young lad in the midst of puberty, even if a tad young for that sort of thing, I figured a visit to a brothel would be easy enough to explain away. And so, here I stood, outside the entrance to Chataya's brothel. With me I brought 2 members of the Kingsguard, in the form of Esser Jaime and Esser Balin, alongside a full guard of a dozen gold cloaks. Venturing inside revealed an intensely unpleasant atmosphere. The smell of sex was mixed with a strong waft of various perfumes, as well as the characteristically shitty smell of the rest of the city. Given the stench alone, I struggled to imagine how anyone could manage to find the atmosphere erotic. Oh, to be sure, the decor was nice, and girls were pretty, but the whole thing seemed more disgusting than enticing, and the place gave me the same feeling as the one I got from a motorway service station. Spotting their royal visitor, one of the girls let out a peep and rushed off, Chataya herself emerging from the background to greet me, a tall, slender, handsome woman who wore a surprisingly conservative dress for her profession. Still revealing, but not as much as I had expected. She gave a shallow curtsy with a small smile on her face. Your Grace, what a pleasure it is to see you here. Come, and I will personally see to it that all your desires are met. I nodded curtly. Many thanks, Lady Chataya, but I am not here for a woman, but for a man instead. At that, I spotted some of the occupants of the brothel shooting me strange looks. I hear Prince Abaron is currently patronizing your establishment. I have business with the prince, and I would like to see him. Some of my gold cloaks sported relieved expressions, and Chataya nodded. You heard right, your grace, but the prince is occupied for the moment. Can I tend to your needs whilst you wait? She gestured, and a slim girl who looked perhaps no more than 14 came over. We have many different maidens to suit your tastes. I pointed to the upstairs, where I knew the private rooms were. Is he up there? I cannot say, your grace. Chataya looked a tad on edge, and I couldn't be bothered to begin issuing orders. Instead, I pulled out my coin purse and tossed it at her, for you to let the prince know I'm waiting to see him, and to keep my men entertained whilst we wait. Chataya nodded, and one by one, the gold cloaks, many of whom I suspected were reporting to someone other than me, were lured away by the whores. Jamie and Balin stuck close by, as I had ordered them to do, waiting in the room Chataya had seen fit to give me, and I had the two of them search it up and down for hidden doors or hidey holes or any other means by which someone might be listening in. Inevitably, Varys would find out about the details of the conversation, and that didn't much bother me, but I didn't want the true nature of this meeting to be revealed to Tywin or Cersei too early, lest they find some way to fuck up my plans. After a few minutes, a baron finally appeared, shirtless. I dismissed Jamie, bidding them to wait outside, and bid a baron in, speaking as he sat down and made himself comfortable. I must thank you for taking the time out to meet me, Prince Baron. I hear you were quite busy. A baron nodded, a smile on his face. Such is the purpose of a brothel, no. I suppose, though I wouldn't know. Kings can rarely afford such luxuries during such tumultuous times. What with the weddings and wars and all. A baron sniped at me with an amused smirk on his face. Which one? The one where your brother choked on his pigeon pie, or the one where you will marry his widow? I was rather referring to the one of my sister to your nephew, the Prince Trystane. Little Myrcella. He nodded and smiled. She's taken well to Dorne, and last I saw her, she was playing with my daughters in the water gardens. From what I hear, Trystane is quite smitten with her. I nodded, and I hear that she is similarly taken in by him. I expect that means that my request for their wedding to be brought forwards will be granted. A baron tutted, my brother is patient beyond all good sense, you see. He will not reschedule just because you asked. I paused for a moment, taking care to meet a baron's increasingly curious gaze. Myrcella's my favorite sibling, and one cannot help but wonder about the health of one's loved ones, and a marriage would help protect her. I leaned forwards, noting that he made no attempt to deny my accusation, and I don't expect you to do that for nothing. In return, I will grant you the one thing you've always wanted. A baron quirked an eyebrow, which is Gregor Clegane. He snorted, your grandfather already offered me a meeting with the Mountain, King Tommen, provided I act as a judge in the trial of your uncle, the imp. Would that satisfy you? A meeting with the Mountain? I don't think so. I think you want the pleasure of taking his head for yourself. I certainly would, if it were my sister. A baron's eyes narrowed. And how, pray tell, would you help me do that? Simple. As it is, my grandfather promises to offer my uncle mercy at his trial if he confesses and repents, at which point he will be shipped off to the wall. My uncle, lacking for much in the way of alternative choices, plans to take this offer. If, on the other hand, he could be convinced to ask for a trial by combat. I smiled. My mother, possessed by her vindictive fury, plans on using the Mountain to represent the crown should that occur. Just imagine it, Prince Baron, the chance to exact revenge on your sister's killer, the great Lord Tywin Lannister helpless to do anything but watch as you bring his rabid beast crashing to the ground. A spectacular sight, I would imagine. A baron looked skeptical. You would undermine your own grandfather in such a manner. Free the man who killed your own brother. My uncle is innocent, I insisted. He is a great many things, but a kinslayer is not one of them. My mother is merely blinded by her own hatred of him. You know your mother hinted that she may wed me if I were to rule against your uncle in his trial. Elaria, my paramour, was practically gushing between her legs at the thought, so beautiful a woman your mother is. A baron chuckled. Then again, Elaria always was a lusty wench. His expression straightened, but I have a greater desire than her, greater than even the Mountain's head. I smiled at the implication, swiftly rejecting his hidden request. I love my grandfather dearly, Prince Baron, even if he and I don't always see eye to eye. If it were up to me alone, I would have Gregor hung, drawn and quartered, and his head delivered to you on a silver platter for his crimes against your family. Alas, it is not up to me alone. A baron nodded sagely. I suppose I must be satisfied with that, for now. And the price for this golden opportunity is the marriage of your sister to my nephew. I nodded, and if I say yes, and my brother says no? I shrugged, utterly nonchalant, then I will find another way to free my uncle. It'll be harder, no doubt, with my mother's desire to see Tyrion's head on a spike, but your refusal is ultimately of little consequence. A baron narrowed his eyes, clearly probing me. Weddings take a long time to arrange, King Tommen. What if one cannot be arranged in time? And Myrcella is too young to be wed, as is Trystane. Hey guys, I really need you to throw some power stones to elevate the ranking smiley face. Chapter 6. Deception 2. A baron narrowed his eyes, clearly probing me. Weddings take a long time to arrange, King Tommen. What if one cannot be arranged in time? And Marcella is too young to be wed, as is Tristane. I was tempted to threaten a baron with my knowledge of Doran's plot to wed Arianne to Viserys, or perhaps Arianne's plot to put Marcella on the throne. Instead, cognizant of a baron's famed volatility, and the dagger that hung off the belt on his waist, I opted for a different approach. I wasn't looking to get stabbed, after all, and no number of guards could save me from internal bleeding or infection. It is not as if I am asking for some elaborate affair, merely a few words muttered before a septon to bind my sister and your nephew together, followed by a public announcement that the ceremony has been completed is proof. As for them being too young, I call bullshit. Just because they are being wed does not mean that they have to immediately be abed. I'm younger than either Tristane or Marcella, and I am to be wed to a girl 5 years my senior. A girl I neither know very well, nor particularly like. A baron laughed as he sipped his wine. Do the Tyrells know this? I let a little annoyance bleed into my tone. Oh, come on, a baron. I am offering you the vengeance that you always wanted. Marcella and Tristane actually like each other, so it is hardly a punishment for them. And it's not like Tristane is the heir to Dorne, not with both Quentyn and Arianne in the mix, so it's not as if you have anything to worry about there. Of course, Quentyn was on his way to get roasted in Yunkai, potentially allowing me to secure Dorne as a future ally by having Arianne bumped off, but I didn't think that would be a productive fact to mention right now. I know Marcella's marriage to Tristane won't stop you from rebelling, not if you really wanted to, but it will ensure she doesn't suffer a similar fate to your sister in that event. I merely want safety for my family, just as you want justice for yours. And, frankly, it is high time for our feud to come to an end, for the good of all involved. A baron's eyes softened marginally, and he appeared contemplative. The Martells did not initiate this feud. I nodded. Then it falls to me, as a Lannister and Baratheon both, to end it. Let us bury the hatchet between our two families, Prince a Baron, preferably in the mountain's ugly skull. A baron let out a harsh bark of laughter, and the tension seemed to drain from his form. That is a lovely image, King Tommen. He sipped his wine and looked at me and then nodded. Very well. I will send a letter to my brother, and the wedding will be pushed forwards. I stood, extending my hand for him to shake. I'll be waiting for the announcement. With that sorted, I left the brothel with Jaime and Balin in tow. I left the gold cloaks behind, enjoying their dose of rampant hedonism, though I found myself somewhat sickened to discover that many of them had opted for much younger girls than I thought suitable. With a twinge of guilt, I realized that I had probably overpaid. Girls, some of which looked to be as young as 12, should not be spending their time on their knees servicing men more than twice their age, even if they were willing, or more likely, desperate. Alas, what had been done was done, and I buried the twinge deep down. I had bigger fish to fry. I made a beeline for the Red Keep, not yet comfortable with spending a prolonged period of time in the city proper, with furtive glances given by all those on the streets, but once inside, I was content to meander for a good while. I had all day to meet Tyrion. He was hardly going to be going anywhere, and I wanted to shake off or at the very least confuse any of Varys's little birds hiding in the walls. As my legs began to ache, Tommen's body not particularly well adjusted to exercise, I made my way to the top cells, where Tyrion was being held. The jailer let me inside, and I had Balin and Jaime wait outside. I could hear some grumbling on Jaime's part, likely an expression of frustration, and I elected to ignore it. Tyrion heard the gate to his cell close behind me, and he stood from his seat, turning his head to look at his latest visitor with curiosity written across his features, Tommen. Tyrion, frankly, looked a bit shit. There were hints of dinklage in there, but many features were entirely different. For one thing, his hair was a silvery white, and one of his eyes the characteristic Lannister green whilst the other was black, though neither eye appeared misshapen. The most noticeable feature was the complete absence of a nose, just a bit of bone and cartilage that left a whacking great hole in the middle of his face. It was a bit shocking, but I had seen worse, and I plowed through. It's King Tommen now. He nodded and moved forwards, giving me a mock bow. Ah, where are my manners? Welcome, your grace, to my humble abode. What can this servant do for you on this fine day? I smiled. I should have known that your time behind bars wouldn't have blunted your wit, nor your tongue. Tyrion looked to be appraising me, seeming to catch on with my friendly tone, and tried to build on the rapport. I've found that being a prisoner suits me. Did I ever tell you about the veil? I smirked. I've heard bits and pieces. Something about you sullying the young Lord Aaron's ears with the tawdry tales of how you milked your eel into my mother's stew. I raised an eyebrow as if I were his disapproving mother. Is that what you wanted to tell me? Tyrion blushed and coughed into his palm. Ah. Well, no, not exactly. I was more referring to some tales regarding the famed sky cells and the trial by combat that ended with a fall through the moon door. He looked at me and frowned. How did you know about that? I gave him a non-answer, if there ever was one, the same way I know you're innocent. Varys, I presume. When I neglected to respond with anything bigger than a smile, he brushed past the topic. Am I to be released? No. Your trial will still commence as planned. But you know I'm innocent. Why would you still try me as a kingslayer? Just because I know you're innocent doesn't mean that anyone else does. My mother, in particular, seems possessed by some fury, and will accept nothing less than your head on a spike. She's spent her time trying to bribe the judges who aren't grandfather, and gathering what is practically an army of witnesses, detailing those times you butted heads with Joffrey. I would free you outright, if I thought it were possible, but I'm afraid that when given the choice between following their king or following Lord Tywin, most people would choose Lord Tywin. Tyrion seemed to deflate and become even smaller. So, it's hopeless, then. Not quite. Grandfather intends to have you shipped off the wall instead of executed. Whilst normally I would be inclined to agree with him and to abandon you as a lost cause, I can't just seem to let you go. I suspect it has something to do with loving thy family. Tyrion snorted. Yes, that old chestnut. His expression became serious again. So, what can you do? Just because the results of the trial has been rigged doesn't mean that the rules by which it will be conducted have changed. You can still call for trial by combat. He gestured to his body. I am hardly a warrior, nephew, and from what I can gather, there is not a man in all of Westeros willing to fight in my stead. I nodded. It is quite true that the attitude of the court has turned quite against you. But just because nobody is willing to fight for you doesn't mean that there isn't anyone willing to fight against the mountain. Tyrion's eyes narrowed as he thought it through, arriving at the only logical conclusion, the Red Viper. I nodded. Risky. Not as much as you'd think. I've done my best to stack the deck in the prince's favor. Even if that fails, I guarantee you this, no matter the outcome of the duel, I would have you alive, and not rotting in a cell or freezing at the wall, but free as a bird. Likely in Bravos, or any other place in Essos where I could have you squirreled away till your innocence could conclusively be proven. He smiled a resigned smile. I appreciate that, nephew. Of course, if that doesn't happen, and a baron wins his duel, then I would have you on my small council, if you would still like a place on it. My reign is in desperate need of competent, loyal, and most importantly genuinely good people as advisors, and I have it on good authority that you are all three. Given time, I think you'd even make a good hand of the king. Your Grace, I would be honored. I nodded and moved on. Naturally, there is a political cost to all this plotting. Once Tywin realizes what I did by turning to the Dornish, he will be beyond furious. To keep him in line and ensure his continued cooperation, which I will need to retain stability, I'm going to have to dangle a particularly juicy carrot in front of him. Tyrion looked suspicious. And what would that be? You know what it is. Tyrion looked to be filled with hatefulness and spite at the very thought. Yes. The airship. I shook my head. Don't act aggrieved, uncle, we both know it's only temporary. If I make Uncle Jaime the heir to Castle Rock, who do you think he will appoint to take his place when Tywin dies? Jaime openly admits that he never had much interest in governance, and you know it. I waved my hand and cut Tyrion off as he made to rebut. The change in heir will last only as long as Tywin does. Though I wouldn't tell him that, if I were you. Tyrion bit down his pride. I see. Very well, then. And there is one other thing. Your woman, the Lady Shay, is one of the witnesses against you. Tyrion seemed stunned. I suspect that Mother has applied a mixture of coin and threats to get her to comply, and that her testimony will be particularly humiliating. If you don't want that happening, I suggest you shout and rage and scream at the end of the first day of the trial, and call for a trial by combat then and there. Mother will no doubt still want to use her to humiliate you, but I can stop that from happening if you ask at the end of the first day of testimony. Tyrion's face cycled through a range of emotions. Rage, fear, concern, and most importantly, exhaustion. He nodded his head slowly in resignation. I will. I smiled and patted his shoulder. Stay strong, uncle. It is only a matter of time. And don't worry, in due time, I will deal with Mother's hatred for you as well. His smile was more genuine this time. I look forward to the day, Your Grace. I stood, offered him a final farewell, and left. Hey guys, I really need you to throw some power stones to elevate the ranking smiley face. Chapter 7. A Baron I. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. The mountain dead, the old lion humiliated. It sounded like the opening to a bad jape, but it felt more to a baron to be a gift from the gods themselves. The boy king was not shy with his price for this bounty he had offered up, and all it took was a few quick strokes of a quill to make it real. And yet, dare he trust a Lannister? The boy king claimed he was no Lannister, that he was all Baratheon, as did his mad brother, but a baron saw little difference between the two. Dragonspawn. They were all monsters in his eyes. Throats, ready and waiting to be opened for their crimes. Their crimes against Elia, against her children, against Dorne itself. His blood boiled, as any good Dornishman's did, at the sight of the golden lion on a background of red, the banner fluttering regally in the wind. Kill, a part of his body seemed to say, fuck the consequences and kill. Rip that bastard's throat out. Rip the whore. Kill them all. Doran has a plan, his mind shot back. Doran always has a plan. Quentyn courts the Targaryen girl. Arianne plots to make Myrcella queen. Patience will win the day, not mindless violence. You can kill now, but your children will pay the price for that killing, and so will you. And what good is victory if you cannot go home to tell the girls about it? Thoughts of revenge, in the sense that Doran planned it, seemed sour to him now. He, like many of the others, had not been happy with Myrcella's presence in the Water Gardens. A Lannister. In our very home. The very thought had filled him with an unquenchable fury. But she wasn't a Lannister, he could now see, she was a girl. Not unlike Sorella just a few years ago. Curious, and playful, and innocent. A baron thought it a shameful necessity that he still thought himself capable of killing her. I wouldn't like it, but if ever the need arose, for my family. And now, a baron could see that the boy king was not much different. Tommen put up airs of being an earnest young lad in court, naive but good-hearted, and similar airs of being a ruthless dealmaker in private, when he thought himself safe from prying eyes. In truth, however, he was ever as much a child as Myrcella was, as Myrcella is. I merely want safety for my family, just as you want justice for yours. No, what the boy king really was a boy. A young one at that, who missed his sister and knew of the dangers he faced, but didn't quite know how to face them. A young boy trying to pull his bickering family back together. It was evident in his clumsy manipulations, his different facades, put up both in private and in public, all aimed at being the polar opposite of his brother and his father. Who am I to deny a young boy his family? And if I can have the mountain's head, and the old lion's pride at the same time, then all the better. And with that thought in his mind, a baron penned a letter to his brother, and received a letter back just a few days later, enclosed with confirmation that the marriage had been completed. The trial commenced in earnest soon after. A long day of dry testimony, followed by one of the loudest tantrums a baron had ever seen a grown man throw. Well, I say a grown man. It wasn't real, a baron could tell. There was anger there, in the dwarf, but his rage came off more theatrical than genuine. This suspicion was furthered by the subtle glances the boy king and the imp seemed to share over the course of the trial. At the end, the imp raged, stamped his feet, threatened to poison all the inhabitants of the throne room, and declared that he had heard enough. He then proceeded to ask for a trial by combat. It was now a baron's turn to share a glance with the boy king. Blood, those eyes seemed to promise him, blood and bone for Elia. A baron stood from his seat then and there, and announced to the world his intent to fight on the imp's behalf. Lord Tywin looked impassive, though a baron could tell from the clenching of his teeth that he was not happy. The queen made little effort to hide her disdain at his decision, not that he paid her any mind. And soon enough, the day came. A baron's spear was tipped with the finest manticore venom, his armor some light leather. He gave it an experimental twirl, testing the weight of the heavy shaft in his arms, looking at the tip with a sort of reverence. This speared IP will be the one to slay the mountain that rides. I shall have it mounted, pride of place, back in Sunspear, alongside the mountain's skull. Before he entered the grounds where the combat was due to take place, a baron was forced to share a few words with the boy king. King Tommen, I expected to see you in your seat, not down here with me. I will be, in a minute. As it is, I came here to offer you some advice. A baron was amused at the notion of this green boy giving him, the Red Viper, advice on combat of all things. What could he possibly have to offer? Advice. He nodded sagely, his expression deadly serious. No doubt you intend to dance around the mountain, to whittle away at his strength and endurance until an opening presents itself. It is a good strategy, but you must remember it relies on distance. The boy king's gaze traveled up and down Abaron's body, landing back on his eyes with a fresh intensity. I know you want vengeance, Prince Abaron, but victory must take priority. Fight smart, and don't let your rage take hold till the mountain is well and truly dead. He is a vicious and hardy beast, and I wouldn't take him for a corpse till his head is visibly separated from his body. The boy king reached into his tunic, withdrawing a sheathed dagger. He handed Abaron the sheath. If your spear fails you, for whatever reason, I want you to use this. Valyrian steel should cut through the mountain's armor as though it were paper. Abaron accepted the dagger initially with skepticism, till he unsheathed it to find that the boy king spoke the truth. The brilliant, swirling patterns on the steel were unmistakable. For the first time, Abaron felt something for the boy king he had never felt before. Respect. Not for a Lannister. Even still, Abaron offered the king a solemn nod, placed the sheath on the back of his belt, and watched as the king went to take his seat in grave silence. All of a sudden, the task he had eagerly been awaiting became daunting. He grabbed Ellaria close, kissing her as deeply as was imaginable, and groping her under her dress in the process, something she actively encouraged. It lasted a mere moment, but it was enough for Abaron, a final goodbye, if it came to be necessary. He emerged into the arena, for that is what it had become, with hundreds of spectators, and the Lannister colors proudly displayed. The small folk jeered his appearance, declaring their loyalties for the crown. Cersei watched him with an eagle eye, hate simmering behind her pleasant facade. The sight only encouraged him, and he went with a smile. Once the High Septon had finished initiating the trial by combat, the fighting began. The mountain was, as ever, a fearsome sight. He was clad from head to toe in utilitarian gray plate, the kind built exclusively for practicality. His sword was 5 feet of battle-hardened steel, so heavy that only the mountain could possibly work up the strength to wield it with one hand. He lumbered about, slower than Abaron had expected, but no less powerful. When he swung his sword, Abaron could tell he swung it hard enough to cleave an ox in two. There was little grace in those swings. They were wild, and would have, if they had landed, killed Abaron in a single blow. As it was, the mountain telegraphed his attacks well in advance, and seemed to be becoming fatigued mere minutes into the fight. What little mobility he had used sparingly, only taking measures to block or dodge when Abaron's spear strayed near a chink in his armor. The rest of the time, he seemed content to hear the sound of Abaron's spear strike and bounce off the plate he wore. Abaron danced around him in pretty circles, almost making a show of the whole affair. Inevitably, he was unable to resist the temptation to taunt the mountain. Have they told you who I am? The mountain's response was breathless, yet still arrogant, emerging from his lips in a growl, some dead man. My name is Prince Abaron Martell. Princess Elia was my sister. Abaron couldn't tell if the mountain was attempting to goad him, or if he was genuine. Who? The Princess of Dorne. Abaron hissed. You raped her, you murdered her, you killed her children. The mountain grunted, and Abaron repeated the words as though they were some prayer. You raped her, you murdered her, you killed her children. You come to talk or to fight? Abaron narrowed his eyes, citing a break in the mountain's defense, a gap between his shield, his sword and his armor. I came to kill. Still repeating his chant, the mountain's irritation building at the sounds of his opponents speaking, Abaron unleashed a flurry of blows. The first was aimed at his throat, bouncing off his gorget, the next at his eyes, the mountain flinching back soon enough for the spearpoint to miss the gap in his helm by a hair and come falling down on his breastplate. You raped her, you murdered her, you killed her children. Shut up. Hey guys, I really need you to throw some power stones to elevate the ranking smiley face. Chapter 8. Abaron 2. The mountain flinching back soon enough for the spearpoint to miss the gap in his helm by a hair and come falling down on his breastplate. You raped her, you murdered her, you killed her children. Shut up. The mountain, in his irritation, bulrished Abaron, who swung around and made his move. Dancing around the mountain's charge, he found himself suddenly behind him, and seized the opportunity. His spear moved forwards in a quick thrust, much in the same manner in which a viper goes for the kill, and slipped through the small gap in the mountain's armor, delivering a quick yet deep cut at the back of his knee. The mountain reeled in pain, turning with an almighty bellow and bringing his sword crashing down towards where Abaron was standing. Abaron met the blow with his shield, which visibly cracked under the strain, and retreated, his arm aching something fierce from the force of the strike. He retreated again as the mountain wound up another strike, and then another, till his back was to the stable. The mountain charged again, albeit now with a noticeable limp, and Abaron dodged out of the way, the crowd beginning to hurriedly try to move out of the way, seemingly losing all interest in the trial. Some were not so lucky, and a poor stable boy found himself being hacked to bits by Gregor in the midst of a blood rage. His arm came off at the elbow, and when he screamed, the mountain cleaved the boy in two with a single swing of his sword. He turned to face a baron, still chanting, and he stood up, now even more daunting a foe, covered from head to toe in blood and gristle. "You talk too much," he grunted, "it makes my head hurt." At this point, the mountain was less lumbering than stumbling. The manticore venom was making its way through his system, and every beat of his heart intensified the pain. A baron, recognizing the symptoms and the fact that Mountain was not long for this world, was once again possessed by his lust for vengeance. Elia. Say it. Elia of Dornay. The Mountain raised his shield at a baron's next strike, and a baron used the moment to divert his swing into another gap in the Mountain's armor, landing a deep cut just under his elbow. He screamed, "Say it. Elia. Elia of Dornay." He brought his spear down in a savage arc, losing all semblance of strategy in the process, the shaft striking the edge of the Mountain's shield and toppling him like a log, and breaking a baron's spear in two in the process. A baron, acting like a man possessed, charged his foe who now lay flat on his back with a scream, "Elia ah!" He brought the broken end of the shaft down with all his weight, driving it into the Mountain's gut with all his strength and firmly pinning him to the ground. Once this was done, he came back around to the Mountain, till his face was almost touching Gregor's helm. "I swear to you, if you die before you say her name, I will hunt you through all 7 hells." He grabbed his helm and rattled it. "Elia of Dornay. Say her name." The Mountain spasmed, lifting his arm and landing a heavy blow to a baron's gut, winding him in the process. He pulled a baron close, and whispered into his ear, "Elia of Dornay." He punched a baron again, and a baron could feel several of his ribs shatter under the weight of the blow. "I killed her screaming whelp." He smiled a bloody smile as he pushed his hand up to a baron's face, gripping his skull in an effort to crush it, "and then I raped her. And then I smashed her fucking head in. Like this." He pulled back his other hand, ready to deliver a killing blow to a baron's skull. In the very moment, a baron remembered the Valyrian steel blade the king had given him, alongside his advice, and he withdrew the dagger from his sheath, desperately slashing at the wrist of the hand that clutched his skull in a vice-like grip. Thankfully, the steel cut through the flesh as though it was butter, the stump spraying blood onto a baron's face as he withdrew, and the Mountain's closed fist sailed through the air where a baron's head would have been just moments later, his other arm suddenly bereft of a hand. Taking the opportunity, a baron backed away, prying the Mountain's now severed hand from his skull, and collapsed down, his chest heaving. He still felt the rage in his heart, but the pain of his ribs, and the hand-shaped bruising around his face compelled patience. He watched the Mountain's death throes from a distance, watching him struggle to stand, till eventually his heaving chest stilled. Wise advice, coming from a green boy. When his breath had been still for more than a minute, a baron approached the Mountain's presumed corpse cautiously, watching for any signs of life, and made once more for his head. The Mountain leapt back to life, his one remaining hand reaching for a baron's neck, tightening around it. A baron, meanwhile, brought his dagger to the Mountain's throat, and hacked his head clean off, the Mountain's hand becoming limp around his throat, allowing him to breathe once more. A baron rubbed the bruising around his throat, and then lifted the Mountain's heavy head for all to see. He looked first to Tyrion, who looked ill, his breakfast coming bubbling back up at the sight of the Mountain's maimed corpse. The old lion looked unimpressed, though a baron could tell that he was not pleased by the clenching of his teeth. "You're next." Cersei seemed similarly perturbed, but made little attempt to hide her fury, her face twisted into a silent snarl. The king, on the other hand, raised his glass in a silent toast, nodded, and then offered a baron a small smile. A baron grinned back, his blood-stained teeth glistening in the sun. For Elia. Tywin Lannister on the prowl was an impressive sight. Every step full of purpose, every movement formidable and intimidating, and he was headed right for me. He made it past the servants, scattering them with a single look such that we were alone, and then leveled his icy gaze in my direction but gave no further indication of his emotional state save for a slight furrowing of his brow. "I thought you smarter than this, Tommen. That trial was a farce." I frowned, still putting up an innocent act. "If you take issue with the result of a trial by combat, then you ought to speak to the High Septon." "The gods." Tywin shook his head and cut me off. "Do I look like a fool to you?" I had Pycelle examine the Mountain's corpse. He concluded from the contents of the Mountain's bowels that there were significant traces of widow's blood in his system. I gave no response, save for a small smile, and Tywin pressed on, I know you visited the Red Viper in the brothel. I kept my tone light, as does everyone else. I don't think I tried to hide that. Tywin quietly seethed, you don't think you should have trusted me with your plans. When I am your hand. Do you know why I did what I did? Why I made sure that Gregor would die and Tyrion would go free? Tywin spoke through clenched teeth, enlighten me. There were a variety of reasons. The trial presented the perfect opportunity to engage in some politicking. I used my mother's threat to make use of the mountain to entice a baron, dangling the prospect of exacting his revenge at the cost of hurrying along Myrcella's wedding. I then used the threat of a newly allied Dorne to bleed the Tyrells, making them pay for the privilege of having their little Rose marry the king. Which consequently, had the effect of weakening their house and strengthening yours. Tywin looked impassive, though I could tell that he was most definitely not happy. I see, and for that you would let an accused Kingslayer, a man who killed your own brother, walk free. A bit hypocritical, coming from you. Or have you forgotten Jaime and Aerys? Tywin looked about ready to throttle me, you are blinded by your love for that hateful little creature. I ignored his glare, believe it or not, that was not the only reason that I made sure to ensure Tyrion's freedom. He's innocent, plain and simple. I had Joffrey's throat cut open to check if he really choked, Tywin said. He didn't. He was poisoned. I smiled and nodded sagely, yes, he was poisoned, but Tyrion wasn't the one doing the poisoning. Then who did? Littlefinger, of course. Hey guys, I really need you to throw some power stones to elevate the ranking smiley face. Chapter 9. Trial. I smiled and nodded sagely, yes, he was poisoned, but Tyrion wasn't the one doing the poisoning. Then who did? Littlefinger, of course. Tywin's tone betrayed nothing, though I could tell he was intrigued, explain. I shrugged my shoulders, it's simple, Tyrion is no fool. If he really wanted to kill Joffrey, do you really think he'd plot to have him poisoned in such a manner that made himself out to be the obvious suspect? Of course not. He'd be halfway to Bravos by the time the poison ever touched Joffrey's lips. Tywin quirked an eyebrow, and that makes Baelish the killer. Ask yourself, who had the most to gain from Joffrey's death? Tyrion immediately found himself in a cell, awaiting his own execution. Meanwhile Baelish absconded with Sansa Stark to the Vale, where he has already married Lisa Arryn. If you're keeping count, that brings the one of the two kingdoms which has suffered no losses during this war under his direct control, alongside its armies, whilst granting himself sizable influence over two more. The Riverlands by way of being the Lord of Harrenhal, and the North by way of his possession of Sansa Stark. Tywin scoffed, clearly acknowledging of my claims about Sansa, but unwilling to admit it. It was at that point I realized that Tywin was likely already aware of this. Hell, he may even have figured it out beforehand, but still allowed it to happen, likely because he believed that I would be a more pliable king. Tyrion's trial was just the icing on the cake, something he could use to get Jaime back as his heir. His next words seemed thick with implication, I wouldn't concern yourself with Baelish. Men who aspire beyond their station rarely succeed. You know, he told Lady Catelyn that Tyrion was behind the attempted killing of her son, and Lady Lisa that Tyrion was responsible for the death of Jon Arryn. He made himself a friend to the Starks and the Tullys, and then he held a knife to Lord Eddard's throat at Mother's behest. He poisoned Jon Arryn, and arranged for the attempted murder of Bran Stark. He pitted wolf against lion, and used the ensuing chaos to advance himself far beyond his station, going from Lord of Rocks and Sheep to one of the greatest lords of the realm. He is a man who knows no such thing as loyalty, and no limits to his schemes. I shook my head and allowed myself some disbelieving laughter to sell the act. I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss him, if I were you. Tywin was, by this point, eyeing me with some amount of suspicion, you can't know that. He kept his gaze level at me, and I stared him down, and then tried to find some way to explain it away, eventually opting for the vaguest and least helpful response, suffice it to say that a king must have many eyes, and many ears. He narrowed his eyes slightly, is that so? Before Tywin could do something against my interests, I thought it best to placate him, yes, it is. And if you help me deal with him and all the rest of his ilk in court, then I'll give you the one thing you always wanted. Jaime may have no interest in being your heir, but he will have little choice if his king orders it of him. Tywin looked at me suspiciously. Of course, I could just as easily keep Jaime as one of my Kingsguard, and have Tyrion inherit Castle Rock instead, if only to whore and drink away everything you've built. Tywin grit his teeth, his grip on the back of one of the chairs tightening till his knuckles turned white, his stare hardening at the threat to his legacy, Baelish will die for his treason. I nodded, happy at his implicit acceptance, and Jaime will be your heir, though not for a while yet. Tywin did not seem pleased at that, and why is that? I have a task for Jaime to complete first, something that will raise his profile enough to justify letting him go. I expect you will get him back in a year's time, perhaps 18 months. It may even be sufficient to restore his reputation from when he killed the Mad King. And what task is that? It varied from plan to plan, but that would take time to determine the best course of action. It was all rather uncomfortably changeable, and I saw little point in speaking of a plan that might never be, not to mention anything of who might be listening in, precautions or no. As such, I wasn't going to reveal my true intentions, but a half-truth that would be true regardless of circumstance would suffice. I want him to help me pacify the Riverlands. Nothing major, just some cleanup work, hunting bandits and sieging the odd castle. When all is said and done, his reputation should be a lot cleaner, and Jaime a lot more respectable a lord. Don't worry, it will only enhance the prestige of House Lannister. Tywin, unaware of this calculation, nodded his assent. I see. As for Baelish, he is too powerful to openly confront. We can always assassinate him, but if we do, you can rest assured that Lysa will turn the Knights of the Vale against us. And if we somehow fail at killing him, he will then use Sansa to assert his influence over the North and the Riverlands, and with that he could wage a war that would drag on for years, and ravage the realm in the process. He looked at me, clearly testing me. The Boltons hold the North, and the Freys hold the Riverlands. Not to mention that Sansa is Tyrion's bride. Just as Marjorie was Renly's. I shook my head. The Boltons may hold the North for now, but anyone who knows anything at all about the North could tell you that they won't hold it for long. The North is too large and too wild, and the Boltons are not respected in the same manner in which the Starks were, and already the lords of the North plot to put the Starks back in power. Sansa is yet still believed to be a maiden, and you can bet she will feature in such plots. I was tempted to tell him about Rickon and Bran, but thought better of it, and focused in further south. The Freys are in much the same position. I doubt there is a single lord in the Riverlands that will be loyal to them for very long without Lannister blades at their back to compel that loyalty. All the better that we should rid ourselves of Baelish quickly, before he can rally support. Not if we want to avoid another war that we cannot afford, which I do. I shook my head. No, if we are going to get Baelish, we first need to strip him of his power and influence without alerting him to the fact that that is our goal. Only once we have stripped him of allies, potential or otherwise, and lured him from the safety of the Eyrie can we have him executed. Tywin looked at me with a strange glint in his eyes. And how do you propose we do that? I reached up and sipped from my glass, the water pleasantly cold. I was aware that Varys was probably listening in, and desiring to reduce the chances of him overhearing, I stood from my seat and walked over to the ledge of the terrace, beckoning for Tywin to follow. When he finally joined me, he seemed irritated at having had to move. Why are we here? The walls of the Red Keep have many eyes and many ears, grandfather, and regretfully not all of them are mine. In times like these, I think you would agree when I say that there is no such thing as being too cautious. Tywin nodded. I spoke to him in a conspiratorial half-whisper. Tell me, grandfather, do you remember encountering a young girl in Harrenhal? About my height, brown hair cut short, gray eyes, a northerner. He frowned. I made a girl matching that description my cupbearer. Why? Well, wasn't that interesting? That girl was none other than Arya Stark. I couldn't help but grin at his surprise, which was evident to me no matter how much he schooled his expression. She is currently wandering the Riverlands, and, as such, is within our grasp. Tywin looked at me. Arya Stark has been missing, considered dead, for more than a year. Our best spymasters have not been able to find not even a whisper of the girl's whereabouts. How do you know where she is? Never mind how. Tywin looked doubtful. If I'm wrong, what does it cost you? If, on the other hand, I'm right. I smiled. You ought to be discreet about it. Send your best and most trusted fighters, clad not in Lannister colors but in plain clothes. If my sources are correct, and they usually are, you ought to be able to find her at an inn near the Ruby Ford, in the company of the Hound. Sandor turned traitor. I waved away his question. He was never one for loyalty in the first place. Kill him, but only if it's absolutely necessary. As it is, I'd prefer it if you could bring him in alive. I have many a task for a tool like that. As for Arya, make sure to let your men know to keep a keen eye on her at all times. She's a smart girl, and I wouldn't put it past her to steal a blade and kill her captors in their sleep in order to escape. I want her here, in King's Landing, alive and unharmed. Tywin nodded. Very well. You can consider it done. I smiled and clapped my hands together. Excellent. Tywin stood to leave, only for me to interrupt his departure. Oh, and I thought it best to inform you, given that you are indeed my hand, that I'm planning some changes in the small council. Some people will be leaving, and some new ones will be joining. Tywin stared me down. Who? I tapped the side of my nose. All in good time, grandfather. All in good time. ... Hey guys, I really need you to throw some power stones to elevate the ranking smiley face. Chapter 10. Jaime the First. If this is power, Jaime thought to himself, then why does it taste so much like tedium? Plotting, politics, manipulations and murders. Jaime watched the business of the small council from the end of the table, and he found himself thinking of all the lords who aspired to a seat at this table. They can bloody well have mine. He watched the king, just barely tall enough to sit at the small council without a cushion under his ass, slowly but surely perusing the documents laid before him. Every so often, he would dip his quill into an inkpot, scratch something out or scribble some note on the side, and then sign the documents given to him. I'm bored, Jaime realized. And sore. His muscles burned from his sessions with Bronn. Where once he had been arguably the greatest knight in all the realms, now he was barely strong enough to lift a tourney sword. The truth stung more than any bruise ever could. It seemed so simple, changing hands. It wasn't. Every instinct, built and honed over years, was suddenly wrong. Bronn, a common sellsword, had disarmed him thrice over with ease, and sent his blade spinning into the dirt. Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. What a cruel jape. The king signed another decree, and Kevin snatched it out from under his quill. Only a few more, your grace. He peeled another sheaf of paper from the top of the pile, and handed it to the king. This is royal pardon for Lord Gawain Westerling, his lady wife, and his daughter, Jane. The king gave the document a quick look over, and then signed it, and the process continued. This is a pardon for Lord Jonos Bracken of Stonehenge. This is a pardon for Lord Vance. This for Lord Goodbrook. This for Lord Moodin of Maidenpool. As the tedium drew on, Jaime entertained himself with thoughts of what kind of king Tommen would be, when he was grown. Being king is a massive amount of responsibility for a child who's never had to deal with any before. A surprising thing to hear from a boy. Even more surprising was what came after. I may not yet be a man grown, but I am far from the child you knew, the one who believed in all those songs. Jaime watched the king sign his name in a surprisingly elegant but still childish scrawl. He watched him read every word on every page, comprehending more than Jaime would have at his age. Wise beyond his years and hardened by war. This son of mine is no man, not yet, but he is a boy no longer. Tommen will be a good king, I can tell. Better than Joffrey. Then again, damn near anyone would have been better than Joffrey. Jaime felt a dull pang of guilt at the thought, but it wasn't genuine. Cersei cared more about the boy than he ever had. He knew in his mind that he should mourn his son, but there was little to mourn. He was a monster. The Mad King come again. This grants Sir Rolf Spicer title to the Castle Castamere and raises him to the rank of lord. Jaime watched the king read and then sign the document, and he suddenly felt exhausted by the whole affair. I'm a fighter, not a lord. Though, I guess I'm not much of a fighter now, either. Jaime pushed himself to his feet. You seem to have these matters well in hand, uncle. I shall leave his grace to you. Kevin responded, urging him to mend the ever-widening breach that had formed between him and his father, and Jaime felt his patience fraying. He turned to Tommen. Sire, do I have your leave to go? Tommen looked at him, and then the rest of the small council, and then back at him. After a long moment, he shook his head. You do not, uncle. I have need of your presence here for a little while longer. Jaime grit his teeth and sat back down, his armor hanging loose over his still recovering body. The king turned back to Kevin. Is there anything else, great uncle? Kevin nodded, and pushed 2 more sheafs before the king. This is a bill of attainder against Lord Edmure Tully, stripping him of Riverrun and all its lands and incomes, for rebelling against his lawful king. This is a similar attainder, against his uncle Sir Brynden Tully, the Blackfish. Tommen gestured to the last 2 on the pile, and those. This is a decree of legitimacy for a natural son of Lord Roose Bolton of the Dreadfort. And this names Lord Bolton your Warden of the North. Tommen nodded, stacked all 4 sheafs together without reading or signing them, and pushed them to the side. I will get to that at a later date. Kevin seemed to be getting annoyed. Your grace. Tommen cut Kevin off with a wave. Worry not, great uncle, I will have the matters seen to in a timely fashion. As it is, there was some important business I wanted to lay before my council. And what is that, your grace? The war. Varys tittered and many of the other lords sported raised eyebrows. The king had not voiced interest in such matters yet, and it was a strange thing to hear him voluntarily speaking of it. Till now, the king had been content to observe the business of the council, but not to truly participate. Kevin addressed him in an even, almost curious, tone. The war is over. Tommen quirked an eyebrow. Do you take me for a fool, great uncle? Kevin shook his head. No, your grace. Then why did you lie to me? I did not lie. Tommen nodded. Correct me if I'm wrong, but has my uncle Stannis been defeated? Your grace. And what of the Ironborn? Have the Greyjoys suddenly bent the knee to the Iron Throne? Has Dragonstone? Has Storm's End? And what of the Targaryen girl in the east? Has she suddenly keeled over and died without my knowledge? Or perhaps she has abandoned her quest for the Iron Throne? Because if she has, I'd very much like to know. Kevin seemed to be reaching the end of his patience. You are yet a child, your grace, with much to learn. Neither the Lord Hand nor I thought it wise to burden you with such matters so soon. Tommen smiled. Of course, great uncle, your efforts to protect me are much appreciated. And yet, I cannot learn without experience, can I? If I stray, I have you as my trusted advisor, alongside grandfather, to advise me upon the correct course of action. The true meaning in his words were clear, and Kevin nodded after a long moment, an intrigued look in his eyes. Tommen glanced about the chamber, and said, I notice that the small council seems smaller than usual. Several key positions lie vacant. And we cannot go about the business of administering the kingdoms like that, can we? There was a round of murmured agreement, and Kevin narrowed his eyes at the king. No, your grace, we cannot. The king pulled out a spare scrap of parchment, quickly scribbled on it, and handed the note to Jaime. Have these people summoned to these chambers, immediately. First a cripple, Jaime thought, and now a glorified servant. Nevertheless, Jaime stood from the chair, grateful for the chance to stretch his legs, and walked out of the chambers, reading aloud to the guards outside the names on the list. Tyrion, Bronn and Paxter Redwyn. What is my son doing? His task completed, Jaime returned to his seat as the king was conversing with the spider. Tell me, Lord Varys, of the wall. Even Varys seemed surprised at the question. The wall, your grace. Tommen nodded. Well, your grace, it is my understanding that Lord Stannis has taken residence at the wall. Supposedly, he has gone to fight off an invasion of wildlings. Tommen licked his lips and nodded. I see. And did the Lord Commander have nothing to say about this? Varys simpered. Lord Commander Mormont is dead, your grace. As I understand it, the wall has no leader for the moment, till one of their number is elected to succeed him. And the Targaryen girl? I have only rumors, your grace. Some say she is in Astapor, others in Yunkai. It is said that she birthed a three-headed dragon in the city of Karth. They all agree on one thing, however, she has set Slavers Bay alight with dragonfire. Supposedly, she means to eradicate slavery, and there have been many slave revolts following where she is rumored to have gone, though precious few have proved successful. Still, she is referred to as the mother of dragons and the breaker of shackles. A commendable goal, if a poor attempt at reaching it. The girl leaves a trail of blood in her wake. Tommen frowned and narrowed his eyes. Marine. Are there any rumors of her in Marine? Varys frowned, very clearly making it seem as though he were deep in thought. A couple, your grace. Chapter 11. Jaime II. A commendable goal, if a poor attempt at reaching it. The girl leaves a trail of blood in her wake. Tommen frowned and narrowed his eyes. Marine. Are there any rumors of her in Marine? Varys frowned, very clearly making it seem as though he were deep in thought. A couple, your grace. Tommen did not seem convinced that that was all Varys knew, but if he suspected anything, he said nothing of it. At that moment, Tyrion arrived in the chambers, shooting Jaime a look as he walked in, and Tommen addressed him, Uncle Tyrion, how are you? Tyrion shot Kevin a look as he responded, well enough, nephew. Much as I enjoy captivity, I find that freedom suits me better. It's much more pleasurable. Tommen smiled. That is good to hear, uncle. In any case, I am in need of a master of coin, and I happen to note that in spite of your acquittal, you have yet to attend a small council meeting since your trial. No matter the reason, I expect you here at every meeting hence, understood. Tyrion claimed a seat on the far side of the table, dragged it near to where Jaime was sat, hopped up onto it, and nodded, yes, your grace. Given your absence from the small council, I will give you a week to reacquaint yourself with the crown's finances. After that, we can get to work. Tyrion nodded, but before he could reply, Bronn came walking in. You called for me. Yes, Bronn, I did. From what I can gather, you have fought for the crown loyally, yes. During the riots and the Battle of the Blackwater. Lord Tywin made me a knight for it. Tommen nodded. Well, Sir Bronn, your services are required in a similar capacity now. I could use your talents as my commander of the City Watch and the Gold Cloaks. Bronn nodded and accepted the post as though he had been expecting it, with all too much dignity for a man of his station. This was planned, Jaime realized. Tommen means to make the Gold Cloaks his red cloaks. Why else put his killer in charge of them? Kevin made to object to the appointment, but Tommen cut him off in a tone that brokered no argument. At that tone, Jaime felt a shiver run through his spine. It ought to have sounded ridiculous, given that Tommen's voice had not fully deepened yet, but somehow he managed to make it intimidating. Though many of the lords silently bristled at having a man of such low birth sit at the table as though he were one of their equals, the combination of the king's gaze and Bronn's sword bouncing merrily away on his hip was deterrent enough to make them keep their peace. Jaime watched Bronn with narrowed eyes, and the sellsword found his gaze and met it with a cheeky grin. I'm watching you, Jaime thought. A tense silence reigned till eventually Lord Paxter arrived, Your Grace. Ah, Lord Paxter. Tommen eyed the man critically, observing his facial features before he spoke. How fare Orys and Hobber, my lord? Are they well? Paxter eyed Tommen back, understanding the threat inherent in his words, and spoke only after a lengthy pause. Yes, Your Grace. My sons are well. Tommen nodded. I am gladdened to hear it, my lord, but I did not call you all this way to talk of your sons. Should you want it, I have a place in my small council for you, not just as the mere advisor that you are now, but as my master of ships. There was no doubt in Jaime's mind that Mace would have objected to being replaced, but he was not present, and so, he could do no such thing. Paxter needed only a moment to consider the offer. He bowed as he spoke. I would be honored, Your Grace. Tommen gestured for Paxter to sit, and once he was sat, Tommen said, I have a task for you, Lord Paxter. Thanks to Lord Varys, it has recently come to my attention that the seat of Dragonstone has been left sparsely defended by my uncle Stannis, who has left for the wall, supposedly to make war with the wildlings. Paxter caught on quickly enough. You wish for me to take Dragonstone? Tommen nodded, ideally within the next 3 months. It is a speedy capture I am looking for, not a lengthy siege. Gather however many ships and men you feel necessary for the task, and prepare yourself to launch an invasion. Paxter nodded. In addition to this, I think it right to warn you not to take your entire fleet to Dragonstone. The Ironmen are ever a tricksy lot, and if Dragonstone does become a siege, I should not wish for the Reach to be left exposed to their raids. The exact number you leave behind, I'll leave to your discretion. After all, you would know better than me. Paxter nodded again, and Tommen stood from his seat, slowly walking around the table as he spoke. Before we bring this meeting of the small council to a close, I thought it best to inform you all of something. I am not my father, who cared not for the business of ruling in favor of drinking and whoring and warring. Neither am I my brother, who is more interested in torturing little girls than in the business of this council. Many of the lords began shooting strange looks at each other at this open disparagement of the late king, but Tommen did not let it stop him. He raised his tone slightly for a moment to regain their attention, and plowed on. I intend on ruling, and ruling well. As such, I will work you all hard, perhaps harder than many of you have worked before. And I will be working right alongside you all. Those words were thick with hidden meaning, and everyone seemed to Jaime to understand this. The king is watching. There was a moment of silence, and Tyrion saw fit to fill it. A lovely speech, Your Grace. Truly. Varys chimed in, speaking with a theatrical flourish. Indeed. It fills our hearts all with hope to hear it. Tommen's gaze stayed cool, unmoved by flattery. You are all dismissed. There was a clattering of wood on stone as all the attending lords of the small council rose from their seats and made to leave. Less than half had attended this particular session, but Jaime did not doubt that every single member would attend the next. Kevin shot Tommen an approving look, and left without a word, likely to report this new development to his brother. Jaime felt himself shudder at Tommen's gaze. It just felt wrong, somehow, to see it coming from a child. He couldn't quite put his finger on it when, all of a sudden, it struck him. Oh gods, Jaime thought, I know what kind of king Tommen will be. He will be Lord Tywin with a crown. Chapter 12. Dream Eye. Though Cersei was most definitely a Lannister, at that very moment, one could not be blamed for believing her to be a true Baratheon. Ours is the fury, indeed. Out. All of you, out. The doors shut behind the servants as they nervously rushed away from their wrathful queen, not wishing to attract her ire. Left in the room with me was Jaime, who was the Kingsguard accompanying me for the day. I swiftly compelled his silence, aware that this conversation was a long time coming. Cersei leveled her head in my direction. Is it true? Did you put that wretched dwarf on the small council? I frowned, still putting up an innocent act. You mean Uncle Tyrion? She nodded. Of course I did. He killed your brother. She raged. And you would give him a seat on the small council. I shook my head. Not according to the gods, if the results of the trial by combat are anything to go by. Cersei scoffed at me. The gods. Pox on the gods. Just because one man was more lucky in combat than another does not prove anything. I quirked an eyebrow. Somehow, I don't think you would say the same thing if Ser Gregor had won that bout. Cersei's eyes looked into mine as she purposefully softened her expression, lowering herself so that she was at the same eye level as me, her skirts pooling on the floor as she crouched. I know you love your uncle, sweetling, but he killed your brother. That vile, treacherous little imp is not to be trusted. I nodded, and I would agree with you. Had he killed my brother, then of course he could not be trusted. It was my turn to look into Cersei's eyes. As it is, he did not kill Joffrey, and so he can be trusted. The same ugly snarl appeared on her face, and she stood, her fingernails grazing my cheek as she pulled away, though her tone became sickly sweet. Oh, is that so? And pray tell, then who did kill my son? I smiled. Why, I thought it obvious. Do you really not know? She seemed frustrated with my defiance. Who? Littlefinger, of course. She shook her head. You can't know that. I was there, sweetling, when the imp made his threats. Threats against you, against Joffrey, all for that whore. He threatened his family for a whore. How can you trust such a man? Easily, when he is family. And it is hardly as if Joffrey was much better, really. Not with the way he treated Sansa and behaved like a tyrant. Frankly, even if Tyrion did kill him, I still would have pardon. She slapped me. Hard, across the face, tears stinging her eyes. She did it again. And again. He was your brother. Your brother. I let any hint of mirth slip off my face entirely. No, he wasn't. He was your firstborn, I'll grant. Related to me by blood, to be sure, but he was no brother of mine and nor was I any little brother of his. Brothers are supposed to care, to protect each other. He hurt me, abused me whilst you turned a blind eye. Frankly, I'm glad he's dead, and I'd wager most of the rest of the realm is too. She blinked in realization, looking at me with a blank stare. Soon, she snapped out of it and shook her head. You're wrong. Tyrion isn't trustworthy. He'll hurt you, sweetling. Betray you. No, he won't, I insisted. You can't know that. I did my best to feign discomfort. I can. She looked at me with scorn emerging once again into her features at my obstinance. Oh. And how is that? Excellent, she had sprung my trap card. I considered sending Jaime away, but on the off chance that the two got together later, it wasn't a risk I could afford to take. If this particular manipulation was going to work, I would have to convince both twins, not just Cersei. I leaned back in my chair and sighed, feigning a world weariness that I only partially possessed, because of my dreams. Jaime, who had till now been silent, had a concerned look on his face. Dreams, your grace. More like visions, to be honest. I've had them since I was young, and I didn't know what to make of them, and yet, everything I saw, it all came true. Bran falling, or rather being pushed, from the tower, Ned's execution, Tyrion's capture and subsequent escape. Cersei looked at me as though I was mad, and scoffed. I looked at Cersei, and I decided to take a bit of a gamble, looking at Jaime instead. Burn them all. Do you remember that, uncle? I want him dead, the traitor. I want his head, or you'll burn with all the rest. All the traitors. Jaime paled, his mouth agape, unable to understand what he was hearing, but, how? Nobody alive knows what he said to me. Not those words, at least. How? Cersei cited Jaime's shock. Jaime. I turned to look at Cersei instead. Gold shall be their crowns and gold shall be their shrouds. And when your tears have drowned you, the Valonqar shall wrap his hands around your pale white throat and choke the life from you. Now it was Cersei's turn to pale. Though she stayed silent, for all these years, you placed more faith in the words of a mad witch than those of your own family, and in doing so, you became your own worst enemy. Not to mention, Tyrion wasn't the only Valonqar at that wedding, was he? She reared back at my words, and shook her head in denial. No. It can't be. Not you. I was eager to put any silly notions she may be having to bed. You can relax. I didn't kill Joffrey, for accursed is the kinslayer. I just didn't remember that he would die till it was too late. She shot me a suspicious look. As a babe, I have seen the dance of the dragons, the age of heroes, the coming of the Andals. I have lived 1,000 years in my sleep, and I have seen thousands of kings. Joffrey's reign made the reign of the Mad King look like that of Jaehaerys the Conciliator. I feigned a shudder. The things he would do, they do not bear speaking. And with the image of Westeros ablaze in my mind, of dragons in the skies once more, of blood filling the rivers instead of water, of a winter that never ends, can you honestly blame me for letting a measly poisoning slip my mind? Cersei gathered herself back up together, and looked at me with damp, conflicted eyes, conveying the pity, concern and anger she felt towards me in that moment. Making a snap decision, she placed her hand back on my cheek. Why didn't you tell me about these dreams? I gently freed myself from her grasp. You would have thought me mad. And, in truth, till relatively recently I thought the dreams to be some product of a twisted imagination, not actual prescience. I mean, what child wants to believe that his own uncle is his father? Cersei flinched and Jaime shot me a look, but neither of them made any attempt to deny it. I was content to sit in the corner of the Red Keep playing with Myrcella. As it is, I must now sit in that blasted metal chair, and it falls to me to face the crises that will come. If I'm to have any hope of success, I will need all the help I can get, and Tyrion is a key part of that. And these same dreams tell you Tyrion is innocent. I nodded, and realization flashed across her face. Cersei looked at me through narrowed eyes. Myrcella's wedding announcement, the Tyrell ships with their gold. Those were no ordinary attempts to curry favor, were they? I looked around, listening for the patter of little feet, only to find silence. That wasn't to say that Varys wasn't listening, but given the sudden nature of this encounter, I could only hope. I looked at her with a smile on my face. No, they were not. If we are to survive, we need both the Reach and Dorne on our side, and Tyrion's trial presented the perfect opportunity needed to secure that loyalty. The Lannister armies may be strong, but alone they are no match for what's coming. We will need our allies, if we are to survive. I shrugged. The mountain was a small price to pay for that. Jaime looked at me with a curious look on his face. And what is coming, Your Grace? War is coming, Uncle. War. What you have fought, what you have experienced. It is nothing compared to what lurks around the horizon. Nothing, you hear me. Dennis dreamed of the doom of old Valyria, and I dream of the doom of Westeros. I looked out the window, speaking in a low, desperate whisper, the two of them listening with rapt attention. Sometimes the urge strikes me, to give up. To climb to the tallest tower in the keep, open the window, and to just fly, like Bran did. Chapter 13. Dream 2. War is coming, Uncle. War. What you have fought, what you have experienced, it is nothing compared to what lurks around the horizon. Nothing, you hear me. Dennis dreamed of the doom of old Valyria, and I dream of the doom of Westeros. I looked out the window, speaking in a low, desperate whisper, the two of them listening with rapt attention. Sometimes the urge strikes me, to give up. To climb to the tallest tower in the keep, open the window, and to just fly, like Bran did. I rubbed the bridge of my nose, as if plagued by some great burden. I've seen your corpses, did you know that? All of you. They haunt me in my dreams. It all seems so utterly, hopelessly inevitable. I clenched my fist till the knuckles turned white, my face drawn in determination, and yet if I chart the right course, tread the right path, I know I will be able to prevent it. To save my kingdom, my people, my family. A lone tear slipped from reddened eyes, and internally I could hear the imaginary audience applaud at my masterful performance. If nothing else, it seemed sufficient to get the two of them to believe in, which is all I really needed. Jaime gulped. I see. I sighed, letting all tension slip from my form, but that is all in the future. We have more immediate problems. Baelish wasn't the only traitor, and as it is, I will need to conduct a purge of the small council to stand any chance of keeping the peace. The Kingsguard too. When the politically opportune moment comes for the blood to flow, we need to present a united front. The king needs to be seen to have the full support of his family. Do I have that support? Cersei gave me a tight nod after only a moment of thought, and said, always, Tommen. Always. Jaime looked at me with something that approached reverence in his eyes. Of course, Your Grace. I turned my gaze to my uncle. Jaime, could you please go and have one of the maids fetch Tyrion for me? Just as he was making to leave, I interrupted him. Oh, and Jaime. Yes, Your Grace. Needless to say that you will speak to nobody about the things you have heard today. Nobody. I turned to look at Cersei, injecting some steel into my tone. I am trusting you two with this, and only you two. Nobody else is to know. He nodded and left the chambers, and Cersei said, "Why are you having him summoned here?" I looked her in the eyes, my gaze unfaltering, to settle the matter of this petty rivalry between the two of you. You were so distracted with your hatred of each other, that you failed to spot the real danger, sat just a few scant seats away from you the entire time. That rivalry was ultimately what got Joffrey killed, by allowing a plotter like Baelish to escape notice. I will not allow the same kind of infighting to undermine my reign, and to endanger my person. As such, I expect you to apologize to him when he arrives. Cersei looked outraged. To that imp. She spat the word as though it were poison. Never. I met her fiery gaze head on, speaking in a cool monotone deliberately reminiscent of Tywin. You will apologize, or you will be shipped off to Castle Rock, do you hear me? Those are the only choices you have. You are my mother, and I love you, but my very life hangs in the balance, and I'll not risk it for the sake of your pride. I won't end up like Joffrey. I kept my gaze focused on hers till she eventually quailed, leaving the air still with a stubborn silence. When Tyrion arrived a few minutes later, he came in with a grin, one which quickly fell off his face as he saw Cersei, "Your Grace." I turned and looked at Cersei, and then back at Tyrion. "My mother has something to say to you, uncle." Cersei stayed silent, and I allowed a threatening quality to bleed into my tone. "Don't you, mother?" She gave a sort of strangled growl, and then bowed her head, her speech emerging from her lips stiff and stilted. "Yes, I." She shot me a look. "Apologize. I shouldn't have tried to have you executed." Tyrion looked legitimately stunned. He looked at Cersei as though she had grown a second head, and then back at me, and then back at Cersei again. Eventually he overcame his shock, clumsily accepting the apology. "Ah. I see. And Tyrion, don't you have an apology to make to my mother?" He looked at me quizzically, and I clarified my words, for threatening her. He nodded, and though the words came out of his mouth more smoothly than they came out of Cersei's, they still bore an uncomfortable quality to them. "Well, of course. I am sorry. For threatening you." Well, that wasn't awkward in the slightest, was it? I clapped my hands together loudly, shattering the tension hanging in the air between the two. Now, with that over and done with, I must leave. I have kingdoms to conquer, debts to repay, disputes to settle and a realm to rule. There is so much work to be done, and so little time to do it in. We don't want to go in, Arya said. There might be ghosts. The hound snorted as he swung off his saddle. You know how long it's been since I had a cup of wine. Besides, we need to learn who holds the Ruby Ford. Stay with the horse if you want, it's no hair off my ass. What if they know you? Arya questioned. They might want to take you prisoner. Sandor grunted. Let them try. He loosened his sword from its scabbard, the dull gray steel peeking over the top, and marched into the inn like he owned it. His face was uncovered, almost challenging the world to a fight. Not that his helm would have helped much, shaped like a hound as it was. Arya looked around, to the long flat stretch of land in all direction, to a small copse of trees in the distance, and the river not too far away. The King's Road ran straight through here. Arya patted Stranger, chewing her lip as she did so. I could run. Take Stranger and Craven and ride away. He'd never be able to keep up. And yet, she led the horses to the stable as he had instructed her to do, tying them to a post, and then went in after him. They know him, she could tell. And I know them. Not the women or the skinny innkeeper, but the soldiers. The tickler and Polliver both. Already, Arya could tell a fight was brewing. There are only 3, Arya thought. Not a hopeless battle, but certainly not a smart one. The third one, a pudgy boy with spots on his face, likely a squire, spoke up, slurring his words slightly. Drunk, this the lost puppy Sir Gregor spoke of. The one who piddled in the rushes and ran off. The tickler put a warning hand on his arm, and shook his head, beckoning the boy to stop. The boy apparently did not notice, and gave the hound a stupid mocking grin, said he ran off whimpering. The hound stayed silent, and Polliver shoved the girl he had on his lap off, and rose to his feet. The lad's drunk. He can't hold his wine, is all. Then he shouldn't drink. Ah, is the puppy scared? The tickler grabbed his ear and twisted, hard, his words becoming a sharp squeal of pain. The innkeeper arrived, arms laden heavy with flagons of wine. Sandor immediately snatched one off the platter, and gulped it down till half his flagon was all but gone. He slammed the flagon down, fished out some coppers and threw them on the table, and turned to the innkeeper. Best pick those up. It's likely the only coins you'll see today. Polliver frowned. We'll pay when we're done drinking. When you're done drinking, you'll tickle the innkeeper to see where he keeps his gold. The way you always do. It seemed as though the innkeeper and the rest of the inhabitants of the inn had caught up. He left quickly, and the girl that had been on Polliver's lap fished a garment off the ground, using it to cover her bare breasts as she rushed off. We should leave too, Arya knew. If you're looking for Esser, you're too late. He was at Harrenhal, and now he's not. The queen called for him. Polliver paused, and Arya took stock of the steel on his body. 3 blades on his belt, a longsword, a dagger, and something in between. He sipped his wine, speaking very matter-of-factly. King Joffrey's dead, you know. Poisoned at his own wedding feast. Joffrey's dead. She felt the urge to smile, but it felt hollow when she did. Still, the news was music to her ears. Joffrey's dead. Who killed him? The hound asked. The imp, it's thought. Him and his little wife. Both Sandor and Arya were confused at that, till Polliver explained it to them. That's stupid, Arya thought when she heard. She'd never marry the imp. Sandor gulped his wine with the ghost of a smile on his face as he heard of the queen's suspicions of Tyrion. She ought to dip him in wildfire and cook him. Chapter 14. Arya. Both Sandor and Arya were confused at that, till Polliver explained it to them. That's stupid, Arya thought when she heard. She'd never marry the imp. Sandor gulped his wine with the ghost of a smile on his face as he heard of the queen's suspicions of Tyrion. She ought to dip him in wildfire and cook him. Arya bit her lip so hard at hearing that she tasted blood. He's one of them. Just like all of them. I should kill him whilst he sleeps. Arya paid only the barest of attention as Sandor and Polliver began to discuss Harrenhal, a couple wenches to warm our beds, and put all the rest to the sword. All of them. Arya blurted out. She covered her mouth, and the two went back to discussing Harrenhal, the Riverlands, and the saltpans. Then, the topic of Sansa came back up. Well, the little bird flew away, did she? Good, she shit on the imp's head and left. They'll find her, said Polliver. If it takes half the gold in Castle Rock, they'll find her. A pretty girl, the tickler interjected, smacking his lips, and courteous too. Not like her vicious bitch of a sister. They found her too, Polliver said. The sister. Rumor is that she was off to wed Bolton's bastard, but the new king put a stop to it. Arya sipped her wine so that they couldn't see her mouth. Sansa Stark has no other sister. Sandor laughed uproariously. Polliver frowned. What's so bloody funny? Then, he leaned in, speaking in a low, threatening tone. Esser would sooner see you return to Harrenhal, Sandor. Or King's Landing. Sandor shook his head. Bugger him, bugger that, bugger you. The tickler reached behind his head to scratch himself, and Sandor burst into action. He lurched to his feet just as a flash of silver flew past him, leaving only a shallow wound on his ribs instead of through the middle of his throat. The tickler's hand was outstretched, as though he had just thrown something. Polliver cursed, drew his sword, and swung. Sandor met his blow, directing it away. I was hoping you'd do something stupid. Sandor met the tickler and Polliver in combat, and it seemed as though they were all an even match for each other. Arya saw the squire scrabbling for his sword, however, and knew she would have to join. She flung her cup of wine at his face, and he went down flat on his hindquarters. She turned back, only to find the hound was being driven back. He's drunk, she realized with dismay. The tickler was reaching behind him, quiet as anything, waiting till Polliver pushed him far enough. Arya snatched up a second cup and flung it at his face, only to find that his awareness was better than that of the squire's. Metal clanged on the floor, and he gave her a cold, hard stare. The squire was slowly recovering, drawing himself back to his feet, and Arya felt panic bubbling in her chest. She could only watch as the tickler closed on Sandor, blood gushing from his face, the stump where his ear should have been replaced with an open wound. He twisted violently, and the two men began to back him into a corner. Arya sighted a third flagon, this one of heavy stone, and she grabbed it, ready to fling before she was stopped. You forgot the other one, you big stupid. The squire had a sword in one hand and her waist in the other, his grip tight enough to leave bruises. Still, he was too close, and Arya strained and reached around, pulling his dagger from its sheath and plunging it into his gut, twisting and twisting. His eyes went big, his sword clattered to the ground, and he fell down, blood pooling around him. Sandor was, at this point, hiding behind a bench, leaning against the wall noisily, taunting them, if you want me, come get me. You think we won't? You're drunk. Sandor kicked the bench, sending it into Polliver's shins. When he fell, a vicious cut followed, and blood spattered the ceiling. Maybe, but you're dead. The tickler backed away, reeking of fear. Arya suddenly noticed that she still held the bloodstained dagger in her hand. All his focus was on Sandor, and he wasn't armored. It was the easiest thing in the world to stab him. And she did. Over and over and over. She was on top of him now, screaming, face splattered with blood. How many? How many? How many? How many? Is there gold in the village? Sandor pulled her off him, and she directed him to the still bleeding squire, and he examined the lad, pricked him in the bowels. You did, that'll be the end of him. He'll be dying a long time, too. The lad whimpered on the ground, begging, and Sandor gestured for her to finish him. She braced herself, searching for his pulse, and when she found it, she plunged her dagger deeper and deeper into his chest till he was still. Sandor began to speak, and she listened in a haze to his jabs, and to his plans. She went off, dutifully, to fetch the wine and coin, and when she returned, they left. He needed help mounting stranger, blood still flowing, albeit slower now. They set off, eyes watching them leave, though they disappeared out of sight as they passed some trees, avoiding the Ruby Ford and following the King's Road, through marshes and woods and weedy fields. Finally, hours later, they arrived at the banks of the Trident, far from the inn. They made camp there, and Arya gathered deadwood for a fire and watered the horses as the hound gulped that last half of a wineskin she had stolen for him. If only I had more wine. Maybe I ought to send you back to that bloody inn for another skin or three. Arya shook her head. No. I won't do it. If he asks again, I'll leave him, I swear it. Sandor saw the look on her face, a jest, wolfgirl. A bloody jest. Eventually, he got the fire going, and Arya watched him. Won't the smoke be seen? The hound grunted weakly. Anyone wants to find us, they only need to follow the blood. We've made a trail straight here. He poured the last dregs of the wineskin into his helm, mixed it with some water, and held it over the fire till the mixture simmered. Take the cup from my bedroll and dip it. Careful. You spill any and I will send you back for more. Pour it over my wounds. She did as he ordered, her fingers blistering at the heat, and he bit down on a stick, a piece of deadwood she had fetched. As the boiling wine poured over his wounds, he grunted, but did not scream, though the stick broke when she did his neck. Finally, with a fresh stick in his mouth, she did his ear, and he did scream then, loud. A long, painful howl, his body writhing, and then he slipped into unconsciousness. She didn't need instructions to finish her task. She bound his head with strips of the squire's cloak, using almost half to stem the bleeding. The hound, she whispered. Maybe he'd be dead by morning. Then, she settled herself in for another cold night, letting the horses graze as they pleased. She lay down, the fire crackling in the corner of her eyes as night fell, the moon visible through the branches. She recited her list. The mountain, she said softly, Esser Ilan, Wrath the Sweetling, Esser Marin, Queen Cersei. She closed her eyes, Joffrey. It made her feel odd to leave him out. She was glad he was dead, but sad that she hadn't been there to see him dead. She turned her thoughts to Tommen. He stopped Arya from leaving for the Boltons. Surely he must know it's not really Arya. She remembered the short, pudgy blonde who had come to Winterfell. Didn't seem the cleverest. All he ever did was play at swords with Bran, and not very well at that. Could he have forgotten me? The thought made Arya long for Winterfell. I wish I could change into a wolf and grow wings and fly away. Arya shook her head, Valar Morghulis, and resumed her recitation of her list. Lord Tywin, Dunson. Arya Stark? Asked a breathless voice. Arya jerked up, her blistered hand closing around Needle's hilt. She looked around, searching for the source of the voice, and saw a helm peeking through the foliage, which emerged to become a knight clad in half-plate and chainmail. Perhaps a half-dozen more knights followed the man, whose helm turned to look at the hound, and then back at her. None of the men bore any sigil, but Arya did not need any sigil to tell that these were Westermen. The man at the front spoke up. You are hereby under arrest, Arya Stark, by order of His Grace, King Tommen Baratheon. No, Arya thought bitterly. I don't think he has. G.O.T. Chapter 15, Tyrion. Anne. If you like the story, give some power stones winking face. ... Tyrion's balls itched. After his initial release, he had not managed to see Shay in what felt like years. It was really only a few weeks, but he already felt himself grow irritable as more and more time passed without release. It was a bittersweet feeling, that. The feeling of being backed up was fast becoming intolerable, but the reasons behind it were strangely pleasant, at least for him. Tommen. The new king was a great deal cleverer than Tyrion had ever given him credit for. A great deal more diligent, too. Oh, to be sure, he was prone to all the fits of fancy to which all children succumbed, but for such a young child, Tyrion didn't know if he'd been even half as clever. The boy took to administration like a fish took to water, and seemed full of an almost boundless and often irritating amount of enthusiasm for things that seemed to Tyrion to be rather mundane. In the small council he was appropriately stern, strict and impassive, and the same for court, but he was still very much a child in all other walks of life. Tyrion remembered when he had first shown the boy the royal ledgers and accounts, and Tommen proceeded to gush over them. He had looked at the long strings of numbers, and proceeded to ask Tyrion a series of exhaustive questions about what seemed like every expenditure since the beginning of the war. Tyrion couldn't find it within himself to begrudge the boy his curiosity. He had been the model of manners and politeness the entire time. His chambers had, at Tommen's behest, been switched to a rather luxurious set of rooms close to Tommen's own, which often played host to the king, as the two would whittle away their hours going through the books and entangling the mess Baelish left behind. Every so often, the comfortable silence would be broken by his nephew asking a question about this or that. From what Tyrion could tell, he was not unique in this regard, as the new king liked to go from solar to solar within the keep, and assist all the members of the small council with their work whenever they required it. Though, from what Tyrion could gather, he was often graced with his nephew's presence the longest of all the members of the small council. Ostensibly, this was so that Tommen could learn the full scope of the art of governance, but Tyrion suspected it was to prevent his lords from plotting against him. A clever idea, that. Father would approve. Father likely already does. Honestly, it seemed that the new king would work himself to death before his wedding. When he was not in the yard, in court, in the small council, or helping one of its members, he could usually be found doing something productive or another. Tyrion suspected that the new king missed his sister, for he could often be found talking about her. Tyrion felt pity for the boy. He's lonely. It was only at Tyrion's insistence, with the hopes that he could secure some more time alone to visit Shay, that the king relaxed some, opting to spend some time fishing. Alas, not even this worked as intended, as the new king often insisted that Tyrion come with. Not to say it wasn't enjoyable to fish with Tommen, but it certainly was not as enjoyable as fucking with Shay. In this, Varys proved his greatest ally, making himself invaluable in allowing Tyrion to slink away from the notice of both the king and Lord Hand to visit her. And so he could finally relieve himself one last time with her, in the eunuch's own chambers. Silken sheets and long legs and smooth skin. A long, languid evening full of sex and wine and warmth. The tinkling sound of her laughter was music to his ears, though Tyrion did his best to ensure that she was too busy either moaning or sucking on his cock to do much laughing. A wonderful evening, in all. Maybe even their best. Likely their last, too. Since then, his world had been work, work, and more work. More recently, Cersei had become more involved. To say his feelings were mixed about that would have been an understatement. A mere apology would never be enough to forgive her for all her crimes against him, and she knew it. Still, Tyrion tolerated her at Tommen's behest, deriving a quiet pleasure from seeing Tommen frustrate her efforts to assert her authority over him time and again. It quickly became clear that the two was not as close as Tyrion had presumed, and that Cersei's influence over him was comparatively smaller than his own. The bitch scolded by her own pup. What a sight. Such thoughts, no matter how pleasant, could not quell his boredom for very long, however. Tyrion shuffled the papers on his desk, stood from his seat, hobbling on his little legs through his chambers. Somehow, he wound his way to the yard, suddenly possessed by the desire to see his brother. Jaime had spoken precious little to him since his release, something justified quite easily as a combination his duties as a Kingsguard and the surprising vigor of his new king. He feels guilty, Tyrion guessed. He knows that Tommen means to unseat me in favor of him. He must know. And yet, if he did, he gave no indication. In their few interactions so far, Jaime japed and teased him as normal, and though he seemed somewhat distant, it was not entirely a strange thing. Tyrion knew Tommen had stolen Bronn out from under him, and that he was building something of a force of his own. Was Jaime involved? As his uncle and Kingsguard both, it seemed likely. Then again, he could just be feeling guilty about Joffrey. No matter how vicious the boy was, Jaime is still a Kingsguard, after all. Tyrion arrived not at the yard, but rather a low ledge overlooking it. The king was present, dressed in a loose tunic, sweat forming a sheen on his skin, a short length of dulled steel grasped in his hands, for the king was yet still too young for a full-length sword. He danced clumsily around Esser Balin, making the occasional attempt at a strike. His body was littered with bruises and small cuts, and yet every time he was knocked down, which was often, he always struggled back to his feet. Jaime was nowhere in sight, and just as Tyrion was about to leave, the stench of perfume struck him. A moment later, pale, soft hands grasped the ledge beside him, and Varys appeared. His grace seems ever a determined sort, doesn't he? In spite of all the help he had gotten from Varys over the years, Tyrion could not help but feel some suspicion of him. It was only natural, he was a spymaster, after all, and Tommen had felt fit to whisper to him his own warning about trusting the eunuch. And so, he defaulted, as he always did, to his wit. He could put Stannis to shame. Indeed. The new king has been a refreshing change. Tyrion smirked. Oh. He's been badgering you too, has he? A treasonous sentiment, my lord. Tyrion looked up at him expectantly, till Varys relented. His grace has proven himself to be most curious. A small silence descended as they watched the king dance around Esser Balin, practicing the odd maneuver whenever Balin would correct an error in Tommen's form. Tyrion did not envy his nephew his training. It was clear he was far behind where he should have been at his age, likely a product of Cersei's coddling, though he was making large strides of progress, thanks to his diligence. After a few scant minutes, however, the king's underdeveloped arms grew too tired to continue, and he retired from sparring so that he could recover. Another squire took to the yard, sparring with someone else, and Tommen went and sat himself down off to the side, picked up his brother's old crossbow, seemingly fascinated by its design. Tyrion looked up at Varys, stood silently beside him. You testified against me. Varys tittered nervously, as did a great many more, my lord. The queen. I am a man of a delicate constitution, as you well know. It was not difficult for her threats to turn my stomach. I do hope you can forgive me, my lord. I suppose I could. Varys quirked an eyebrow at that. Have you seen the Lady Shay recently, my lord? Tyrion smiled. You know I have not, Lord Varys, as per my father's commands. Varys nodded, implicitly acquiescing to Tyrion's hidden request. I expect we have brighter days ahead, and a long future ahead of us, with his grace as he is. Tyrion watched Tommen test the drawstring of the crossbow, and how is that? He has the makings of a good king, wouldn't you agree? Patient, diligent, humble, pious, just. Clever. Got. Chapter 16, Smiling. Tyrion watched Tommen test the drawstring of the crossbow, and how is that? He has the makings of a good king, wouldn't you agree? Patient, diligent, humble, pious, just. Clever. Varys nodded in agreement. Yes, my lord. Clever. At least for his age. Though that may not be my choice of words, I would agree. Tyrion quirked an eyebrow. And what word would you use, then? Varys rubbed his silky chin, pondering his choice of words. Gifted, perhaps. Gifted. Seems an even stranger choice of words. Varys had an odd look on his face, and Tyrion caught on. What do you know? A secret. Tyrion snorted. So many secrets, these days. Why, even a baron seemed to be giving me an earful. Queen Myrcella, I'm aware. Apparently, his graces as well. Oh. How did he react? He appears to have largely dismissed it. He's confident that his sister could never betray him in such a manner, at least not willingly. He's lucky, to be so confident. Indeed. His relationship with his sister is far warmer than yours. The queen doesn't seem best pleased with you, my lord. Tyrion shrugged his shoulders. When is she ever? He looked back up at Varys. Did you tell him? Varys smiled. No, my lord, and that's the secret. Tyrion remembered the non-answer Tommen had given him, back when he had spoken to him in his cell. Tyrion watched as Tommen loaded a bolt into the crossbow, fascination written across his features. Oh. Then who did? That's the very thing, my lord. Far as I can gather, nobody did. Tyrion looked up at Varys to see his expression as serious as it had ever been, and then scoffed. What, are you telling me the boy is magic? Blessed by the gods, is that it? Should I go to the High Septon? Varys crinkled his nose in distaste. I wouldn't say blessed, my lord. But something is definitely off about him. I didn't take you for a very superstitious man. You know how I became a eunuch, my lord. Can you blame me for my caution? Tyrion watched as Tommen aimed one of his bolts at the target at the edge of the sparring yard. Though the target was obscured from his angle, it was apparent to Tyrion that Tommen had missed, shook his head, and loaded another bolt. Tyrion spoke with amusement and a certain degree of incredulity lacing his tone. Are you telling me my nephew is a blood mage? Varys shook his head. No, my lord. Then what? He isn't a mage, my lord, he's a dreamer. Tyrion scoffed, a dreamer. What? Like the Targaryens? Like Dennis? The Baratheons do have some Targaryen blood in them, Varys insisted. And the Lannisters are an old house. It is not impossible. But wasn't Tommen a bastard? Jaime's son. Or had Robert gotten lucky? Tyrion looked down into the yard, and observed Tommen's features more closely. Green eyes, blonde hair, a slim build though that didn't mean much, given his age. He looked every bit the spitting image of a Lannister. Tommen's eyes met his from across the yard, and the boy offered him a kind smile and friendly wave, and then turned back to his crossbow. Nothing like Joffrey, Tyrion mused. Tyrion remembered the old phrase, every time a new Targaryen is born, the gods toss a coin in the air and the world holds its breath to see how it will land. Could Tommen be the opposite side of Joffrey's coin? Tyrion shook his head, do you have any proof? Or have you simply gone mad? Varys shifted uncomfortably, though it felt to Tyrion to perhaps be feigned discomfort. Well, my lord, Tommen knows things he cannot possibly know. Tyrion was curious now, like what? Well, Varys was cut off by the nearby sound of wood clattering on stone above him, and then a brief flash of brown crossed his eyes as the spent bolt fell to the floor. Tyrion bent down, and saw a crossbow bolt lying near his feet. Looking across the yard, he saw Tommen sport a sheepish look, and shrug apologetically at him from a distance. Tyrion shrugged back in what he hoped was forgiving manner, and turned back to Varys. Only to find him keeling over with a huff, his face paler than it had ever been before. There was what looked to be a crossbow bolt protruding from his back, the quarrel sunken deep, right to the fletching. Blood began to seep out onto Varys's robes, staining the yellow fabric as it spread. Tyrion looked frantically around for the attacker, only to sight a boot-shaped blur slip around a corner at the end of the hallway in which they were stood and disappear. Helpless to give chase, Tyrion turned Varys's slumped form over to its side, his eyes glassy with shock, blood seeping from between his lips. Suddenly, with the strength of a man possessed, Varys grasped Tyrion's shoulder in a grip so tight he feared it might leave bruises. It was him, Varys whispered. He knows. Tyrion felt panic bubbling in his chest. Knows what? Who? Varys's speech gradually became more and more unintelligible as he slowly died, coughing up more and more blood till his chin was covered by it. Tommen. He called me here, for dragons. Tyrion shook him by shoulders. What do you mean? Varys spoke with a bloody rasp, and with his last breath, said, long live Aegon, the one true king. Tyrion shook his shoulder again, but to no avail. He was dead. Well and truly gone. Aegon. Tyrion observed the blood on his hands with a morbid fascination, and looked over the ledge once again, his gaze swiftly meeting Tommen's from across the yard. As he saw him, Tyrion felt his blood suddenly run cold. Tommen was looking at him, straight in the eyes. It was apparent to Tyrion that he had watched Varys die, even if nobody else appeared to have done so. Tyrion shuddered. He's smiling. The capital was in a furor. The Master of Whispers, a member of the small council, killed. And in broad daylight, no less. Honestly, leading these people about by the nose was almost hilariously easy. A few careful words here, a suggestion there, and out of nowhere materialized this grand conspiracy against the crown. The suspects were endless. Stannis, Daenerys, the Ironborn, the Vale, the North, the Dornish, anyone. There were spies in the walls. Not that much of this bore any fruit, of course. Initially, many people laid accusation against one another, keen to be seen as loyal defenders of the crown. After this, as per my instructions, no accusation could be laid against anyone till anything in the way of substantial evidence could be provided to indicate the identity of Varys's killer. Naturally, the king was above suspicion. Well, apart from in Tyrion's mind, anyway. But I wasn't too worried. He knew better than to trust Varys. Still, this was all a convenient enough excuse to launch a purge. With the Master of Whispers dead, and a mysterious assassin supposedly wandering the keep at night, an effort would have to be made to force this mysterious figure into the light. As such, at my behest, and with the approval of the rest of the small council, the process of locating and opening up almost every secret passageway within the keep could begin. I made sure to keep some hidden, just for emergencies, of course. The inhabitants of the passageways, however Varys's little birds, were all rounded up and locked away till I could figure what to do with them. No more listening for the pattering of little feet. It was a glorious feeling. Not to say I wasn't still going to be cautious, but I was much safer today than I had been just a few days ago. And I would be safer tomorrow than I was today. And that was, as far as I was concerned, a step in the right direction. And so it was that I enjoyed a nice, quiet dinner with my family and my Soontobe family in this world. Cersei sat at the opposite end of the table to me and Jaime stood guard by the door. Kevin, Tywin and Tyrion were all regrettably absent. On my left was sat Marjorie Tyrell, and her father, the Lord Mace Tyrell. The room was dark, with only flickering candles for light and a small hearth in the corner for warmth. It was comfortable enough for me. With the cut of Marjorie's dress, however. Are you not cold, Lady Marjorie? Wouldn't you like a cloak? I am touched by your concern, your grace, but luckily for us Tyrells our blood runs quite warm. Indeed, chimed in Lord Mace. Cersei gave a stiff smile, and I resisted the urge to break out laughing at the almost palpable tension hanging in the air. Instead, I focused on cutting my meat into small chunks, hiding my smile as I did so, and eating them slowly and deliberately. Sir Boros may have tasted the food, but some poisons worked by accumulation, and I was not one to take a risk. Marjorie made an attempt at peacemaking, likely well aware of my mother's reputation for vitriol. Father, isn't the queen's gown magnificent? The fabric, the embroidery, the metalwork, I've never seen anything like it. You might find a bit of armor quite useful, once you become queen, perhaps even before. Marjorie looked up at Cersei at her not-so-veiled threats. I hear you stopped your carriage in Flea Bottom on your way back to the Sept this morning. Marjorie nodded. Yes. She turned to face me. I paid a visit to an orphanage the High Septon told me about. Marjorie does a great deal of work with the poor, back in Highgarden, boasted Mace. The lowest among us are no different than the highest, if you give them a chance, and approach them with an open heart. An open heart is what you'll get in Flea Bottom if you're not careful, my dear, said Cersei. Not long ago, we were attacked by a mob there. We had a full complement of guards, and it still didn't stop them. We barely escaped with our lives. I nodded. It is not the healthy man that one should fear, but rather the lean and hungry looking. Desperate men so rarely have anything to lose, and death by the headsman's axe for treason appears a far better prospect than a slow death by starvation. Cersei looked indignant. Joffrey. Got. Chapter 17. Iron. I nodded. It is not the healthy man that one should fear, but rather the lean and hungry looking. Desperate men so rarely have anything to lose, and death by the headsman's axe for treason appears a far better prospect than a slow death by starvation. Cersei looked indignant. Joffrey. I kept my tone calm and collected, deliberately reminiscent of Tywin. Joffrey let the people starve, and the 500,000 sheep finally turned on their shepherd, as they are wont to do. Hunger turns men into beasts, Marjorie said. I'm glad House Tyrell has been able to help in this regard. They tell me 100 wagons arrive daily now from the Reach. Wheat, barley, apples, we've had a blessed harvest, and of course, it's our duty to assist the capital in a time of need. And the assistance is much appreciated, Lady Marjorie. I chewed on my meat, and continued once I had swallowed it, but my mother is right. Food only goes so far, and I should ask you to either travel under heavier guard, or to cease this charity of yours, lest you wind up suffering the same fate as poor Lady Lollies. With Varys's killer still uncaptured, it would be unwise to take undue risks, after all. The ghost of a cruel smile could be seen tugging on Cersei's lips at that. Did she think my warning was a threat? Knowing her, it was likely. An uncomfortable silence descended over the table, and Lord Mace in particular looked out of place. I was content to keep eating at my sedate pace, though my mother had long finished her dinner and was now working on her second cup of wine. I was still halfway through my meal, and though I enjoyed the tension, the silence fast became intolerable. Let us speak of happier things, then. Tell me, Lord Mace, how fare the preparations for my wedding to your daughter? At this Mace brightened considerably. Very well, your grace. As per your request, the celebrations will be kept humble, but I have been assured that many a lord will be in attendance, practically the entirety of the crownlands. Humble? Cersei questioned, only the thinnest veneer of nicety masking the malice in her tone. She herself had not wanted a grand ceremony, this I knew, but her hatred of the Tyrells was greater than her grief-induced lethargy over Joffrey. My son is a king. I cut her off, my tone still dispassionate. Who happens to be destitute, mother. And the guests matter more to me than the event itself. If there are 3 great occasions at which the most work can be done, they are weddings, funerals and tourneys. We lack the gold for a tourney, and we can hardly expect the realm to travel the length of the country on the eve of winter for poor Lord Varys, but a wedding. Marjorie pouted. Will you be working during our wedding, your grace? I waved my fork in the air in between bites. The realm never sleeps, my lady. If you have not already learned that, you will, soon enough. Marjorie seemed intent on playing up her innocence, feigning nervousness, but you will help me learn, won't you? I remained indifferent to her advances, initially, my lady, but I'm afraid this profession of ours of ruling it is not something that one can learn. You are either suited to it, or you are not. From what I hear, you have quite the head on your shoulders, and I should like to see that in use. Marjorie smiled. I would like that too, Your Grace. I looked at her for a long moment, and then said, I'm sure you would. A silence once again descended over the dinner. Just before I could finish my meal, however, a red cloak arrived at the door to the chamber. Let him in, Sir Jaime. The red cloak came and stood before me, and offered me a short bow. The Lord Hand requests your presence in the Tower of the Hand, Your Grace. I frowned. Did he give a reason? No, Your Grace, but he did tell me to inform you of the urgency of the matter. I nodded, stood from my chair, and said, well, then. Lead the way. We walked through the keep at what felt like a half-jog with my smaller stride, Jaime close behind. The steps leading up the Tower of the Hand were particularly problematic, but eventually we made it to the chamber in which Lord Tywin was. Opening the door, revealed a half-dozen knights, fully armored, though they lacked any form of insignia or banner. And in their company, what looked like a young boy, with a mud-covered face and matted hair. A touch of Maisie Williams shone through, but only a little. Otherwise, she looked like she was described, with dark hair, and a long face, and gray eyes. She hung from her arms, each one in the grasp of a different knight, stubbornly refusing to carry her own weight. Her clothes were tattered and worn, and she looked as if she were exhausted. It was clear that she had attempted to escape, and had failed repeatedly. Still, there was an air of defiance about her, of a childish sort of rebellion present in her eyes as she shot Tywin a murderous glare. This was Arya Stark, all right. Lord Tywin looked at me as I came in, and said, how did you know? I quirked an eyebrow. I believe I already told you that. Enough with the games. How? I gestured to the girl. Why? Do you recognize her? Is she the one? She is the girl from Harrenhal, to be sure. As for her being Arya Stark. I turned back to Jaime. Care to weigh in here, uncle? He approached her, lowering himself to his knees to look at her face, and then nodding. Her hair is shorter, her face more gaunt, but this is Arya Stark. I turned to the knights, and Sandor. What did you do to him? Two of the knights shared a look, and spoke with a slight stammer. We caught him as well, Your Grace. We left him in the cells, in the company of the Grandmaster, as he was quite badly wounded. We had to carry him on a stretcher much of the way. And their belongings. One of the knights raised a finger and pointed at a Hessian sack, filled with various odds and ends, sitting on the floor next to the table. Everything should be in there, Your Grace, apart from their swords. Did you find a thin one? I asked, approaching the sack. Needle, I believe it was called. One of the knights nodded, and Arya raised her head and shot me a venomous look. I hauled the sack up onto a chair, and then loosened the drawstring as I went through their possessions, taking an account of all their things. What are you doing? Asked Lord Tywin. Looking for something. Looking for what? I left his question unanswered, as I realized that it was not going to be found in the sack. This is all. I asked the knights, you found nothing else? One of the men shook his head. This is everything, Your Grace. Immediately, my gaze flicked over to Arya, still hanging from their arms. Though she smothered it well, she could not hide the small upwards twitch that showed on the corners of her mouth. Hold her still, will you? I approached her, left hand grasping her jaw, lifting her head, so that I could look into her eyes. Where did you put it, I don't know what you're talking about, she spat. Now it was my turn to smile. We'll see about that. Then, I began to pat her down, and immediately, Arya realized what I was looking for. No, she cried, writhing in place and trying her best to hurt me. Her foot caught my shin, but save for a small expulsion of air through my nose, I gave no indication that I felt a thing. After less than a minute of searching, it came to be I found it in her breeches. A small protrusion under her waistband, hidden by the curve of her hips, roughly half the size of my palm and disc-shaped. I reached inside, and the knights had to hold her back by her hair as she tried to lash out at me, screaming, tears leaving tracks down her face. I withdrew my hand, having secured my prize, and said, take her to the top cells, if you will, and make sure to have some red cloaks guard her cell, and guard it well. Get her washed and looked at by the maester, and mind you make sure she has every comfort short of freedom. I'll not have it said that the crown mistreats its prisoners. The men looked to Lord Tywin for confirmation, and when he nodded his assent, they hauled Arya off, her feet dragging dejectedly along the floor. Once she was gone, Tywin gave me a long, hard stare, his lips pressed together in displeasure. What, he asked, his tone dangerously cool, was that? Wordlessly, I walked up the table where he was sat, and gently lay my prize on the top of the table, just out of Tywin's reach. Tywin stared at it, and then looked back up at me, half angry, half proud. Because what I had just placed on that table was a heavy iron coin. It was the favor of the faceless men. That, I said, snatching the coin back up off the table, was me saving your life. Chapter 18. Nightmare I. The world feels like water. It's heavy, and it surrounds me. Flowing and fluttering as I move, and then settling back into stillness. Silence reigns supreme. It's not uncomfortable by any means, this weight. It presses tightly on the tops of my shoulders and arms and back, but it never constricts. It's warm like a blanket. It reminds me, in a moment of melancholy, of my mother. Not Cersei, my real mother. So full of love and life as she was. Looking around, all that can be seen is a plain of darkness. Shifting sands and growing flowers and fish jumping in and out of rivers and streams and birds chirping in the air and snakes slithering through grass and snow falling down and shards of ice sprouting 1,000 feet into the air, sparkling in the evening sun. My breath emerges from between my lips in a cloud of mist, and all of a sudden, I'm shivering. And then, nothing. The black claims me once again. Why does it feel so strange to dream? They never used to be like this before. Never so vivid. And then, the world swirls and everything changes. I'm in a tower, in a keep, though not any I recognize by sight. The wind bites my skin, cutting deep and freezing me to the bone, but I don't shiver. Little rivulets of water drip down the walls, sparkling in the fading light of the sun. Ahead of me, a trickle of dots appears over the horizon, then a flood. They are all white, I note, and gray, and sparkling. Panic hits only a moment later, when the realization of my location finally hits. I'm at the wall. Or, at least, I think it's the wall. I look around, and I'm alone. I look down, and then I'm not. So many corpses. Enough to make a man think the world has died. Some of the bodies are big and armored, though the details of the armor are difficult to make out. I see straps and furs and glittering steel and not much else. There are smaller corpses too, some women, some children. They are all piled on top of each other, each looking like they had been freshly killed. In spite of this, it's hard to tell who they all are. Gold and silver and green and blue and gray and yellow, the colors of all the houses, of their clothes, all blend together. I look back at the specks, and a morbid sense of calm overcomes me. Maybe the world really has died, I muse. For Westeros, it certainly wouldn't be out of character for things to get this fucked. The specks are starting to mass in the distance, now. Forming one big clump and charging. I smile, and refuse to allow myself to panic. If this is how it ends, then I'm okay with that. It's as good a death as any other. Maybe there's another world after this one. Beside me, a pair of gloved hands grasps the ledge. Their big hands, and looking up reveals dark hair and a powerful body clad in black leather and white furs. This is a warrior, if I've ever seen one. On the other side, another pair of hands, daintier and softer, grips the ledge as well. It's a woman, with silver hair and sharp eyes, though I can't quite make out the color. A cloak of scales flows down her back into the bloodstained floor. Neither seems hostile. I close my eyes, and suddenly I'm flying. The wind whips through my hair, bitterly cold on one side and unbearably hot on the other. I open my eyes, and I see 1,000 men ahorse beneath me. The river forms a fork from above, almost like a trident, and their armor glitters in the sun. It's ice, I realize. They're armored in ice. And then the ice stops glittering, and the rays of the sun above me are all driven away by a shadow. The shadow, a dragon, I now realize, swoops down and spews a torrent of fire from its gaping maw. I'm helpless to watch as the army screams and melts away like dew and turns the rivers into torrents, flooding over and drowning the land. The rider seems to change every time I look. Sometimes it's a flash of flowing silver hair, and other times a shock of blue cropped neat and short. And then, the dragon turns to me. Its teeth are too many to count, crammed into a mouth that can barely accommodate them. They are all yellowing, and razor sharp. But the teeth are almost irrelevant, almost as much as the scaly skin and bony wings. Its maw opens, and red-hot flames spew out. All around me, my sheets are slick with sweat. It's almost pitch dark, my eyes note, and a little movement reveals that I am in my bed. I'm sat bolt upright, my chest heaving, my heart beating 1,000 times a minute. What was that? A small trickle of moonlight filters through the shutters, and I use it to navigate my way out of bed. Without the warmth of the covers, and the sweat on my skin rapidly cooling as I calm down, I begin to shiver. In the corner, there is a small lamp, the candle covered to allow me to sleep. I go over to it, and removing the cover casts a warm, flickery light over the surrounding area. Though this isn't my office, I keep a table in my chamber. I sit down in my chair, neatly stacking and pushing away the mess of papers I had been working on last night. I have a stack of thick tomes on my desk, all legal volumes borrowed from the Grandmaster stemming from my attempt to create a version of common law for Westeros. It was very much still a work in progress. When it was finished, I'd submit it to the small council for review, and later, the Lords Paramount. It was a beast of a task, and one of my longer-term aspirations. I ignored it for now, however, pulling out a spare scrap of parchment and readying my quill to scratch out the details of my dream whilst they were still fresh in my mind. I kept my notes short, and made sure write them in code. No doubt, anyone who saw it would think it gibberish. When I was done, I tucked the parchment away under all the other papers, and went back to bed, though sleep evaded me the rest of the night. Thoughts of the dream, of its meaning and of its cause, lingered all night long. The next day, the lack of sleep weighed heavy. Sir Jaime's swings, kept light on account of my smaller frame and weaker arms, felt as heavy as a ploughhorse. There is a harsh clang as metal strikes metal, and an uncomfortable scraping sound as I disengage off to the side, taking the brief reprieve to catch my breath and wipe the sweat from my brow. Though we are only training with tourney blades, I insisted on wearing some armor, and it feels like I'm being cooked alive. Worth it, though. No amount of comfort is worth the risk of accidentally winding up brain damaged. We circled each other once again, blades raised in preparation for a strike. I attempted to look for a flaw in his stance, and it was only after a long moment of searching that I found one. His blade was raised a tad too high, and his legs looked open. I offered a tentative swing to open him up for a follow-up. To nobody's surprise, it's a trap. He deflected my attack, using the parry as an opportunity to loosen my grip on my sword and open my guard. Then followed a lunge, parried in the nick of time, though it felt like deflecting a freight train, and then a series of slashes, each one pushing me further and further back. My arms move almost automatically to defend me, and I'm proud to report that his attack failed to penetrate my guard, though it had certainly thrown me off balance. In a real fight, I knew, I'd have been killed a dozen times already. Jaime, even weakened and fighting with his left hand, was leagues above me. Bronn, clearly, had done his job well. Though I had always known that, for some reason today, the knowledge of my own limitations enraged me. My focus narrowed, my breaths became fast and shallow, and hot blood pumped through my veins. I charged. Jaime, now a more methodical fighter, remained an immovable wall in the face of a storm. He weathered my blows, deflecting my strikes with relative ease, waiting till I exposed myself so that he could become a hurricane himself. I kept up the pressure, and evidently, it was working. My sword strayed near his neck with a stretch of my arm, and he met it in the nick of time with his gauntlet, his right arm, bereft of any hand, raised. I switched the angle of my attack, and his sword met mine, the blade slipping down mine and striking my arm. Pain flowered from the point of impact, and my teeth clenched. At this point, I would have normally conceded the fight, but a stubborn rage stirred in my gut, and I kept my blade swinging at Sir Jaime, though ultimately it was all in vain. His arms were stronger, his reactions faster, his reach longer, and I was nearing exhaustion. He caught my shoulder with the blunted practice hook that had replaced his missing hand, and he used it to give me a hard shove. I landed on a plate of my armor, the metal striking my back with enough force to wind me. Jaime approached me, and held the tip of his blunted sword to my neck. "Do you yield?" he asked. I yield, I wheezed, gasping for breath. Chapter 19. Nightmare 2. He caught my shoulder with the blunted practice hook that had replaced his missing hand, and he used it to give me a hard shove. I landed on a plate of my armor, the metal striking my back with enough force to wind me. Jaime approached me, and held the tip of his blunted sword to my neck. "Do you yield?" he asked. I yield, I wheezed, gasping for breath. I let my head fall back to the ground. After I had made it clear that I didn't want anyone to take it easy with me, I had not won a single bout. It really gave you a new appreciation for soldiers when you realized just how large a gulf there was between you and them. Between Loras, Balon, Jaime and Bronn, I never found myself wanting for bruises. It was to be expected, I knew, but that didn't make the defeat sting any less. "Are you all right, Your Grace?" he asked, practice sword clattering to the ground, His hand extended to help lift me to my feet, concern lacing his tone. I accepted his offer, catching my breath on my feet with my hands on my knees. I'm fine, I'm fine. Just pushed myself a tad too hard is all. You have advanced leaps and bounds, Jamie said. And all in a few months, too. No need to rush. You'll be a great fighter in your own time. I still lost, I pointed out. You got sloppy in this last fight, Your Grace, he said. Don't make the same mistake again, and you'll be fine. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain in my arm was returning, I know. Sir Jamie frowned. Is something the matter? You don't usually attack like that. I shook my head. Just a bad dream, is all. Just a bad dream. Jamie looked around for any prying eyes and ears. Though this terrace, the same as the one Bronn and Jamie used in the show, tucked in the cliffs beneath the Red Keep and overlooking the Blackwater, was secluded, Jamie knew better than to be careless about such matters. Even with Varys gone, it appears that my efforts to impress upon him the importance of caution had been successful. If you want to tell me, he whispered, you can. I'll keep your secrets. I know you will, uncle, I said. Then, I feigned a world weariness I only partially possessed, rubbing tired eyes and scowling as I spoke, but what is there to tell? Just more corpses. Corpses and armies and wars and killings. So many killings. It's all I ever seem to dream about, nowadays, I groused. I'm so sick of all the corpses. Why can't I ever get a happy dream, for once? Jamie looked at me pityingly, though he looked a little uncomfortable with the situation. Nothing rankled like pity, even if he didn't mean it like that. I changed the subject. How's the hook? He looked at his right arm quizzically. It's practical, Your Grace. Well, I figure if you're going to be a fighter again, a hook would be better than a golden hand. I'll have another made for you, of gilded steel this time, with an edge so sharp you could slice through glass. I looked at him. Only if you want it, of course. Jamie smiled. I would like that, Your Grace. I nodded, my breath fully recovered now. Good. I stood up straight, cradling my arm. Are you injured, Your Grace? I nodded. It seems so. Don't worry, it's nothing serious. You should still see the maester. I nodded. I know, I will. We walked to my chambers, and when we arrived, I called for the Grandmaster. Before Jamie could leave to fetch him, I stopped him on his way out. Uncle, I promised Tywin that you would join him at the Rock. Jamie seemed panicked by the idea. Your Grace, I have been a Kingsguard since before you were born. Members of the Kingsguard swear their oaths for life. I know, I interrupted, but Joffrey broke that tradition when he dismissed Barristan. And I swear you'll not lose any honor for it when the time comes. Jamie seemed hesitant. Circumstances demand sacrifice, uncle. We must all do our duty. I have sacrificed my childhood for my duty. Tyrion has given his face. For you, the cost will be the White Cloak. And there is no other way. Jamie asked, a desperate look on his face. Why did you join the Kingsguard, uncle? I questioned. He seemed to have difficulty getting the words out. To be closer with Cersei, he admitted. I nodded. And are you close with her now? He shook his head slowly. No, Your Grace. I understand your reluctance, uncle, I do. With all you have lost, the White Cloak must seem like all you have left. Jaime's eyes glistened. Your Grace, You are a good knight, uncle, I told him, looking him in the eyes to make sure my words landed. A good knight, White Cloak be damned. Take pride in that. I had to stop him bowing before he left, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. Arianne Pav. They arrived in the throne room with little in the way of pomp and grandeur. Arianne stood at the helm of the party. Behind her was Sir Aris Oakhart, resplendent in his thrice-damned white cloak. It was honestly a relief, now, that her attempts to seduce him had been stymied so quickly. Arianne didn't know how she would have tolerated a man who seemed so foreign to the concept of wit. Still, Arianne could not deny he cut a dashing figure. She knew the king had requested that Trystane attend his wedding alongside Sir Aris, and she watched as his eyes flicked over their party, a flash of irritation crossing his features when Trystane could not be found. Even here, Arianne mused, I am unwanted. And that had been the plan, originally, to send Trystane. But a baron had interceded with a letter, and specified that it would be better if she came instead. Her father, wanting her out of the way, readily concurred. When they had departed their ship, only the imp and her uncle and his paramour stood to greet them, escorting them to the keep and the king. And what a king he was! Arianne, hearing word of him from afar, had expected to be disappointed. The picture in her mind was of a small child, pudgy and naive, more boy than man, and certainly no king. She had expected a ridiculous spectacle, an immature babe sitting in a monstrosity of steel and iron. Ariane was disappointed, to be sure, but not in the way she had expected. There was no denying the king's youth. His features were young, his frame small, so much so that Ariane suspected he was no taller than herself. But he was also no suckling babe. The roundness of his cheeks was slight, the baby fat in the process of melting away to reveal sharp and regal cheekbones. His expression was impassive, his gaze penetrating and powerful. Around him, his counselors appeared to either cower, or to pay rapt attention to his every movement. His form, from what Ariane could discern behind his tunic and coat, looked lean and strong, at least for his age. Were he any other man, Ariane found herself thinking, and I a little younger, I would have him Abed. That was not to say that all was well with the new king, of course. Whilst he was growing nicely for his age, he appeared to have traded away his youthful vigor. His movements were slow and deliberate, and a certain indescribable world weariness marked his demeanor, of the kind her own father had in his bearing. There were small, dark circles under his eyes. The king knows more than he says, Uncle Aberon had warned. Be wary of him. He is not the boy you think he is. Looking at his eyes, Ariane did not doubt her uncle. I know, they seemed to say, I know everything. Those eyes dragged across the party, starting with Esser Aris, making its way to her cousins, and then finally landing on her. Ariane suppressed a shudder, and plastered a pleasant expression on her face. Her hair cascaded down her shoulders in soft ringlets, shimmering and smooth. Her dress exposed more than it covered, Ariane knew, and sought to arouse. The curve of her breasts was on full display, though her nipples remained mercifully hidden. The yellow fabric was thin and flowing, and in a certain light seemed to disappear entirely. Thin golden chains hung loosely off her form, the glittering adornments only highlighting her features. The king, again, surprised her. His eyes flicked once across her body, and then landed upon her face, half-lidded from a mix of boredom and curiosity. He seemed utterly unaffected by her manner of dress. After a long moment of silence, Aberon proudly declared, "My family, King Tommen." Charmed, the boy king said, seemingly disappointed by the absence of his sister. You must be Princess Ariane, yes. Ariane curtsied, I am, your grace. And the lovely ladies behind you, I assume they are some of the famous sand snakes. Aberon smiled and nodded, two of my eldest daughters, Nymeria on the right and Tyene on the left. The king offered an impatient smile as her cousins both curtsied, welcome to the capital. If you don't mind, Prince Aberon, I would ask that your family stand to the side till the regular business of court concludes. Unless there is a more urgent matter they have to present, I will greet them more appropriately on my terrace. Aberon seemed unaffected by the insult, though Ariane felt her cousins grow hot with silent anger behind her. They all filed to one side of the throne room as the business of court resumed. A trail of people, small folk and hedge knights and even some minor lords formed a small huddle in one corner, the men emerging from the huddle to greet the king. The men, though they had clearly made some effort, reeked and appeared in dull brown rosespun. They kneeled down and appeared to tremble before the throne as they begged for justice. Ariane, utterly uninterested in such affairs, looked around. Sat across from her, some few seats away was a hard-nosed, balding old man with a bristling beard and a bowman as his sigil. Lord Tarley, Ariane guessed. Her uncle had told her he had arrived not a few days ago, only to find himself with a seat on the small council. It was said that the new king valued his martial prowess greatly, and had made him his master of war within the week. For what purpose, it was not known. The king was an extremely secretive person. Ariane observed him with interest, only to be taken away by a nudge from her uncle, sat beside her. Pay attention, he whispered. You'll learn much more watching the king than you will watching him. When the small folk had finished his plea, the king crooked his finger beckoning for his great-uncle, the Lord Kevin, to approach. The old lion's lapdog. The king and his master of laws shared a few whispers and then the master of laws shook his head and withdrew. Whatever words they had shared, the king made the final decision. His rulings were the law. Chapter 20. Telling them what to do. If hit 130 power stones, I will release another chapter. When the small folk had finished his plea, the king crooked his finger beckoning for his great-uncle, the Lord Kevin, to approach. The old lion's lapdog. The king and his master of laws shared a few whispers and then the master of laws shook his head and withdrew. Whatever words they had shared, the king made the final decision. His rulings were the law. Goodman, the king said at last, I have heard your tale, and I agree that you have been wronged. Your livestock was given to your neighbor for better breeding and safekeeping during a time of war, and have survived even if your crops have been destroyed, yet your fellow has taken the choicest and returned to you only the sickly and valueless. There exist those in this court that think this a small matter not fit for the king to address. They are wrong. Honor compels me to bring justice to all those who rest under my protection. Men like you feed the realm, and it is not just that you should be thrown out a living when you are able to work and are still a loyal subject of the crown. I am, the farmer insisted. Grace. My sentence is this: you are to intermingle the entirety of your flock with his, and from thence divide your flock into 3 groupings of any size you desire. Your neighbor, though he has not acted very neighborly, shall firstly claim one of these 3 groups as his own, and you shall claim the other 2. The king nodded, and his master of laws declared, in the name of the 7, by the authority of the crown this judgment is rendered, and the matter hereby settled. Ariane shifted in her seat, whispering to her uncle, an unusual judgment, she muttered to him. I don't believe I've heard a ruling like this before. The king is a master of unusual solutions, her uncle murmured back. He calls it his 3rd way. Ariane sighed. Why did you ask me here? She asked at last. What use is this to me? Went unsaid were the words when I am fighting for my birthright. It's been far too long, Ariane. I've missed my niece. And my uncle. She observed a baron's profile, but that doesn't answer my question. Her father had been sparing with the details when he had sent on her way. Be careful, was all he had said. King's Landing is a pit of snakes. She had only laughed at that. Why, father, I love snakes. A baron turned to look at her, a wry grin on his features. The king is a queer lad, I've learned. Strange, but not in a bad way. I would wager he could teach you a lot, niece, he waggled his eyebrows, and I would wager you could teach him just as much in turn. Ariane furrowed her brow, whispering, is he not to be wed? Though that would not have stopped her if she truly desired him. Still, she could not deny that the thought appealed to her. I could be a queen. The king, for all his youth, was not an unattractive man, though he lacked the rugged wildness that she usually went in for. And all the better if it would sow chaos amongst the lions. A baron seemed to concur with her thoughts. To a Tyrell, yes. But they are our ancient enemies, are they not? He smirked. Now be quiet, and pay attention. Ariane, at the behest of her uncle, did precisely that. Disputes and petitions came to the attention of the court, and were all promptly and efficiently settled in that same swift manner. The king is a harsh taskmaster, a baron had told her, harsh but fair. It spoke highly of him that her uncle refused to call him usurper, and Ariane suspected his victory over the mountain had sated his lust for vengeance somewhat. When news of his victory arrived, impromptu celebrations had broken out all across Sunspear. The tale of the Valyrian steel dagger that ended his life, and of its origins, soon spread far and wide, and men told drunken tales of the blade that killed the mountain to each other in inns and taverns. The attitude among the small folk towards the Iron Throne, whilst still broadly negative, improved significantly once details of the fight, and the meeting that preceded it, started to emerge. The Lannisters, on the other hand, remained much reviled across all of Dorne. At least that monster admitted to his crimes before he died. We got that much justice, at least. Court wound down to a close not long after, and all the king's attendants filed dejectedly out of the throne room, exhausted. Ariane followed her uncle from the throne room through the winding halls and passages of the keep to the terrace at which the king would meet them and spend the rest of the evening. Ariane settled herself at a table, nursing a cup of wine that a serving maid had deigned to pour. The Tyrells, alongside several Lannisters, joined not long after. Cakes and cheeses were carted out for their consumption as they awaited the arrival of the king. The queen appeared, polluting the air with her presence. The false smile behind which she hid her malice was so thin as to be almost transparent. She was a great beauty, to be sure, but her smiles were superficial and did not stretch to her eyes. Speaking with her was a game of trading hidden barbs and meaningless platitudes, and thankfully the queen quickly grew bored with her and moved away from her table. The Tyrell girl, Marjorie, was a far more pleasant sort. Ever the pretty and delicate flower. I might well take her to my bed, Ariane thought. She could certainly benefit from the experience. She was a lively sort, and seemed amused when Ariane announced her intent to tease her betrothed. Finally, the king arrived. He had changed, and appeared refreshed. His demeanor, impassive and domineering in court, had flipped completely. He walked with a youthful spring in his step, offering smiles and greetings freely. He approached their table, secluded in a quiet corner of the terrace, and pulled out a chair. I must apologize, princess, for my brusqueness in court. I could tell it offended you and your cousins. I assure you, no insult was intended. It is merely an unfortunate necessity, I have found. Ariane raised an eyebrow seductively. Oh. The king nodded, seemingly completely oblivious to the suggestiveness of her tone. Yes. There is much work to be done, now that the bulk of the fighting is over and done with. We may have won the war, but we have yet to win the peace, and that is a task that demands my total attention. I am wed to my duty, in this respect. Ariane looked at the king, his apology ringing hollow to her ears. She flicked her hair back defiantly, and decided to test this new king, that poxy bitch. She snorted. I know her. Dry as dust between the legs, and her kisses will leave you bleeding. You can let duty sleep for once, and stay with me tonight. Marjorie looked stunned by her audaciousness, though not as offended as Ariane had thought she would be. The delicate rose is less delicate than she looks, Ariane thought to herself, bemused. The king looked at her flatly, unimpressed with her blatant proposition. What can I say? He said jokingly. I'm a masochist. I can play the bitch, if it excites you. My uncle tells me you are yet a maiden. No man should be a maiden before his wedding night. You need a woman, your grace, and I would please you well. The king calmly sipped his drink. Water, not wine, she noted. A careful one, this king. He observed her skeptically, a touch surprised by her boldness, though he rebuffed her advances regardless with his tone, if not with his words. I appreciate the offer, princess. If ever I am in need of such assistance, you will be the first to know. She pointed to the table where Numera and Tyene were sat, talking with her uncle, and my cousins would as well. They are beautiful, wouldn't you say? More so than me, and I assure you they would be just as eager as I if you decided to take them Abed. None of us have had a king, and we are all eager to try. We'd teach you how to please the Lady Marjorie properly. Two barons, with teats, the king laughed. Now there's a thought. The princess was just telling me about your sister, your grace, Marjorie said, hurriedly changing the subject, blushing something fierce as she did so. Apparently, she has taken well to Dornay. The king kept his eyes on her, brow furrowed with suspicion, so I have heard. Sella seems to have taken a liking to Sivas. She wins consistently against Prince Tristane now, or so I am told, though some suspect that the prince is letting her win as a way to gain her favor. Ariane knew the king corresponded regularly with his sister, and that he likely had spies as well, but the depth of his knowledge was nonetheless surprising. That she has, your grace. The Princess Marcella sends her apologies, that she could not leave to attend your wedding. It is good that she is settling in, Marjorie said. I hear the water gardens are quite the sight to behold. I should like to visit, one day. You are more than welcome. Ariane looked around the terrace and gardens growing atop it, though I must say, it is quite pleasant here as well. Why are you here? The king abruptly questioned. Not that I mind, of course, but it seems strange for Doran to send his heir to the capital when his brother already represents Dornish interests on the small council. Because I will not be staying much longer, a baron cut in, approaching their table. Elaria longs to see her children, and I will admit that I do too. I have not seen my three youngest for too long. Loreza is only 6, and I have not seen her for near a year. I wouldn't want her to forget her father's face. So, Ariane has come as my replacement. Like the boy king, she too sat dumbfounded at the news. Of course, if my father knew he would never have agreed to this. It is no wonder I wasn't told anything. The king's eyes narrowed ever so slightly in suspicion. Ariane noted, as they observed a baron, I hope I have not offended you. A baron shook his head. No, King Tommen, not at all. Quite the contrary. I am confident that Dornish interests will be protected, so much so that I no longer feel the need to personally ensure them. The king's gaze turned on her, suspicious and scathing in equal measure, and then leapt back to her uncle. And you are sure there's nothing I can do to convince you to stay, a baron? I do so value your counsel, and would loathe to lose it so soon. I'll stay till the wedding at least, King Tommen. And maybe the tourney I hear you plan to throw after it, but then I must return home. The king gave a false smile that did not quite reach his eyes. I see. And the two of your daughters will leave with you, will they? A baron laughed and shook his head. They will go where they please, King Tommen. I have learned long ago that there is no telling them what to do. If you want to read ahead of the public release, or just want to support me, you can join my Patreon. Patreon.com/Nolma.